Okay, we'll make a start, everyone, and just make sure I've got my controls working okay. I'm delighted and honoured to have the opportunity to welcome everyone to this year's YORhub Conference. I'm the host for day one of the conference today, so I'll be with you through all the sessions. For those that don't know me, I'm Mike Raven. I'm YORhub's Performance and Improvement Manager. I have a background in construction procurement and construction project management. You'll see me often providing client advice. So it's very much an open offer to any of the clients on the call today. If you're looking for people to talk to about potential schemes, feel free to get in touch, and I'd love to come over and have a meeting. We've got a really good program for both of the days this year, which I'm really excited about and looking forward to some really good speakers. In terms of the program for the day, so in a moment I'll be handing over to my colleague Gary, who is the program manager for YORconsult. He's headlining a panel discussion around current factors affecting the industry. After that, Mark Ives, who is a program manager for YORcivils, will be covering our new YORcivil Major Works 2 framework. And then after that, we've got Stef Wright from our YORcivil team discussing the new Procurement Act and how it affects construction professionals. I think this one's particularly going to be very interesting because everyone's been wrestling with the new act and the new requirements since February. We're now 9-10 months into it, so it's going to be interesting to see how it's been applied, how it affects people. And then I'll round off the day with a few closing remarks and highlighting the program for day 2 on Thursday. So just to mention to everyone, if you've got any questions at all, please use the Q&A function on Zoom to ask questions. We will be obviously monitoring program and time scales, so do apologise if we're not able to answer every question that comes out today, but we'll certainly do our best to moderate and to feed through questions that we can. We are going to be recording this conference and it will be made available on our YouTube channel after today. So anyone who can't make it today or any of your colleagues that may want to see it afterwards, we can provide that. And we will be providing feedback forms to attendees after the event because we're always keen to see what went well, what could be done differently. This is the first time for a few years we've done a virtual event, which, you know, keen to get people's thoughts and feedback on that. So with no further ado then, I'd like to kick off the first session, the State of the Industry panel discussion, which is being chaired by Gary. Gary's from our Sheffield City Council team and head of YORconsult. So Gary, if I can pass over to yourself.
Thanks very much, Mike. Good morning, everybody. This is my first virtual conference with YORhub. I'm used to the in-person ones, so slightly disconcerting to talk to a sea of anonymous Zoom attendees. I'm used to seeing some friendly faces in the room, but I'm sure we will get on okay. So first and foremost, I'm just going to share my screen, and hopefully that is coming through okay for everybody. Okay, and also just to check that I have my panel members ready. Yes, I do. Great. Okay. Right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first session of the YORhub Virtual Conference for 2025. This will be a virtual panel discussion on the state of the UK construction industry. So, first and foremost, I think it's worth starting by outlining the importance of public procurement in the UK construction industry. More than simply enabling the building of a block of flats or a new section of road or a length of curb line, public procurement impacts quality, cost and societal impact significantly. So that shouldn't be understated in terms of the work that we do. The value of public procurement is also not to be understated. In general, around 400 billion is spent annually in the UK on public procurement, and a good proportion of that is spent on construction-related projects. So this session today will provide, hopefully, a relatively high-level overview of some key information related to the current state of the UK construction industry, as well as offering insights from our panel members on some key challenges and opportunities for you to consider. So I should introduce myself as your host for this session. As Mike has already mentioned, I'm Gary Wright. I am the Programme Manager for the YORconsult framework, which is part of the wider YORhub family. Myself and the team from Sheffield also act as framework managers for the other frameworks in YORhub, those being YORbuild and YORcivil. I am a former project manager with both public and private sector experience. Prior to joining the framework team, I worked for Sheffield Council for a number of years and in the private sector before that. So I have around 10 plus years of delivering capital projects in some form or another, including major public realm and city centre regen schemes. So to move on to our panel members, if I could ask you to introduce yourself, please, Ross.
Yeah, hiya everyone. My name's Ross Markwell. I'm the Business Development Director for Esh Construction. Worked for Esh for over 20 years. I think that photograph must be from probably the start of my career rather than from now. We are framework partners on several frameworks with YORhub. The YORcivils framework, both north and east and south and west, across all the lots. YORbuild framework, and hopefully YORcivil's major framework to be announced in due course. We deliver civil engineering schemes and social housing across the Yorkshire region. I also sit currently as the national chairman for CECA, which is the Civil Engineering Contractors Association, representing all of the regions and nations at a national level down in Westminster to try to lobby and rally for funding and better conditions across the industry, as well as highlighting and lobbying any potential industry issues that we have. So quite a broad spectrum of experience.
That's great. Thank you very much, Ross. Mark?
Hello, good morning, everybody. My name is Mark Atkinson. I'm a director at MSF. I primarily oversee pre-construction, sales and planning activities within the business and looking at our next 5-year strategic development. In terms of my background, I've been in the industry for 20 years, primarily in highways and construction and rail and aviation activities. And within Yorkshire, with MSF, I've worked indirectly for nearly every single local authority within the region. And within YORcivils, we work for the vast majority of the contractors delivering a wide range of schemes, which is primarily traffic signs, lighting and highway technology. And outside of that, I'm also the vice chair of a local children's charity, which is called Brave Hearts, which I'm very passionate about. And that obviously leads into what I'll talk about a little bit with social value later on.
That's great. Thank you very much, Mark. And last but not least, David.
Thanks, Gary. Hi, nice to meet you, everybody. I'm David Robinson from Wright, Levett, Bucknall. We're a multidisciplinary construction consultancy. We've got offices across the UK and the world, but in terms of YORconsult, we've been on the YORconsult framework since its inception. So we're lucky enough to be on the current YORconsult 3. We're on lot 2 multidisciplinary, 5 quantity surveying, 8 building surveying, and 9 project management. We're currently doing schemes in all of those lots with a variety of clients across the region. So thanks, Gary.
Thank you very much. And I just wanted to make a point, if it's not already obvious, what we've tried to do this morning with this session is represent our framework, all of our framework, essentially. So we have Ross primarily representing our contractors, albeit he is from the civils framework primarily. We've got Mark, who represents our subcontractors and supply chain that sits beneath our main contractors, and then obviously we've got David from RLB representing our consultants. So that will hopefully become apparent to you, with the slightly different perspectives that are going to be offered a little bit later in the session as we get into the topics that we would like to discuss. So thank you for those introductions, everybody. So we would like to start with a relatively high-level overview of the current state of the construction industry in the UK. That's the general overview in the UK, and then during the panel discussion itself, we will focus a little bit more on the Yorkshire and Humber region specifically. So starting with general construction output, i.e. work done within the industry, you can see here total UK construction output has apparently grown by 1% to August 2025, and these figures are from the Office for National Statistics. So that's a modest uplift in the period, as you can see. That is down though on previous years. So for example, in 2023, total construction output grew by around 3%. So there is an indicated slight reduction in total output year on year. Interesting to see that public non-housing new work has surged in the period by 22.5%, apparently driven by education and healthcare projects. But public housing has fallen sharply in the period, fairly significantly there at nearly minus 15% in new work and minus 11.5% in repairs and maintenance work. If we move on to talk about infrastructure investment, in 2025, the government has committed new infrastructure funding for the next 10-year period of around 725 billion, with annual allocations including 6 billion for hospitals, 3 billion for schools and colleges, and 600 million for justice sector improvements. So some, despite what you may think of the government and how well they're doing, can't be argued that there's a significant investment there in infrastructure going forward over the next few years. Just to touch on workforce demand, the CITB, the Construction Industry Training Board, forecasts that by 2029, between 2025 and 2029, nearly 50,000 additional workers per year will be required, which is a massive uplift in the workforce within the industry. And the resourcing of that and construction recruitment and retention is something we're going to touch on a little bit more during the panel discussion. And overall, the construction workforce is expected to reach 2.75 million by 2029. And then if we look at procurement and contracts, I said at the start of the session today that public procurement accounts for nearly 400 billion, so around 385 billion annually, with construction forming a major share of that. So I've not been able to find a single published figure for total local authority construction spend as an example, but this is expected to exceed 10 to 15 billion annually, and that again forms a significant share of the overall infrastructure investment in the UK. So there's some key headlines that we just wanted to share with you. Moving on to some specific challenges and opportunities within the industry. This is a bit of a long list that we came up with in devising the content for today's panel discussion. So these are the various things we discussed and decided whether to include within our discussion. So to run through these in relatively high level. So economic challenges within the industry can include things like ongoing inflationary pressures and how these affect the supply chain. Generally, local authorities being under pressure on spending, which can affect their capital programs, as we probably are all well aware. We could consider things like changes in political leadership with upcoming elections and changes in priorities and political commitments and how that can affect spending plans. Forward planning and pipeline, it continues to be a hot topic. It's potentially can be seen as a problematic thing and also an opportunity within the industry with effects felt throughout the supply chain. This can affect things like investment decisions and bid, no bid decisions. So we're going to touch on that in a bit more detail. Consistency of approach can mean all manner of things, really, but what it boils down to is public sector clients all doing things in slightly different ways, and this can be particularly relevant in areas such as the delivery of social value and requirements around social value and employment and skill. Recruitment challenges, as I mentioned, those significant numbers that we've just talked about in terms of the requirement for the construction workforce to grow over the next few years. We've got an aging workforce generally, but people working longer and retiring later. There may be things to consider, like a lack of awareness of some of the new opportunities that come in the construction industry for new careers in new areas, and general difficulties in recruiting and retraining skilled staff. Digital innovation, so new digital tools and approaches offering opportunities to improve efficiencies and transparency in the procurement process is something to consider. Legislative reforms, some of which we will be well familiar with in the form of the new Procurement Act and the Building Safety Act, and potentially other changes. There are things like late payment and whether that's still a prevalent issue within the industry. Insurance challenges such as the availability and affordability of policies at the moment. Well-known global conflicts and the impacts that can filter down into the UK construction industry and the supply chain. Things like sector pull and new sectors competing for work and resources in terms of those skilled construction industry roles. And then general procurement options and trends and things like moving away from single stage, more of a focus on two stage, more of a focus on design and build, possibly an increase in direct award, that kind of thing. So that was our long list, and these are all things that we've considered. And what we've decided to do is boil our panel discussion down into some key themes which cover a few of those different topics. So the themes that we're going to focus on today and we'd like to cover primarily are around economy, funding and project delivery. We're then going to pose some questions to the panel around forward pipeline of work and the importance of that and the impact of it. And then we're going to finish on some questions around procurement trends. So I can stop rabbiting on so much in a moment, because I'm going to start handing over to the panel to feed out questions for them to give us their insights into, which you might be glad to hear. And we're going to start with the theme of economy, funding and project delivery. So if I could ask, David, can you give us an overview of the current economic climate and the impact on the construction industry, please?
Yeah, thanks, Gary, of course. So I think it's worth starting off with just a couple of current statistics, just feeding off where Gary left off. So currently, in terms of annual inflation for tender prices, our forecast is about 3%, Gary, 3.03. But interestingly, the consumer price index is currently at 4.1%. So things are getting more expensive, which they generally do, but construction isn't increasing as much as other sectors. In terms of productivity, as you picked up, work done volume is plus 1% in the year. So obviously the industry is getting larger, which you'd expect as an economy grows. But new orders have actually decreased 2.19% in the year. So things might be getting tighter. The other thing that's a factor in this is that infrastructure and a couple of sectors that you picked up have actually increased. So that masks some of the reduction in some of sectors that have been hit most. It's not a uniform 2.19% decrease. So potentially this is positive for clients because there should be some more capacity in the industry. It takes a little bit pressure off things like skills shortages, etc. But there is an issue that when a market doesn't universally retract, and sectors like defence, data centres, infrastructure, etc. are actually increasing, there can be a shift in attention from contractors and suppliers and I suppose consultants as they move resources into the in-demand sectors, which leaves a challenge for those of us that are still operating in the retracting sector. We'll touch on this in other bits, I'm sure, but There is also a bit of a concern of ours that if labour shortages are being discussed now and skills shortages now, when we've got a relatively sort of steady market, things are going to get really, really big issue if we do have an increase. So we need to, even though things are sort of steady-ish, we do need to be keeping investing. In terms of input costs in construction, so input costs aren't the price that the client pays, they're the costs of the resources needed to build a building or carry out a project. So things like labour, plant, machinery. Looking at that forecast compared to the other forecasts available gives us a good insight as to what's at play. So currently we're looking at a 3.8% increase in 2025, but a 2.9% in 2026. But interestingly, wages are expected to increase by about 5.2%. So you've got 5.2 for wages, but a 3.8% overall. So presumably that must be a decrease in things like materials and plant. So it suggests that if material costs are expected to fall, there's going to be a bit of pressure on suppliers. If we focus on Yorkshire, so what we're seeing ourselves in RLB is that Leeds and Sheffield are sort of two regions that I work across, but they are actually remaining strong in terms of growth. New projects starting in new build and refurbishment. We do find that scheme viability in the private sector is still an issue. And that's probably, it's been a long-term thing where house price and flats increasing. They have increased prices for houses. It does go up, but it doesn't go up as fast as construction costs recently, which means that viability becomes a problem. It is helped though by interest rate stability, because obviously the cost of borrowing is quite a sensitive metric in that viability equation. We're seeing a lot more private rented schemes. When you talk about city centre flats, which lines up because flat prices and apartment prices have flatlined and decreased slightly over the last few years. But that's what we've seen anyway. But rents have been increasing, which makes PRS schemes logically a lot more viable. So that's an interesting trend that we're seeing. In terms of sectors, because I think this is interesting for, obviously we're all focused on the public sector, but it's just interesting to know what's happening generally. So in terms of data centres, a few new data centre developments have actually been identified for Yorkshire and the Humber. So this is encouraging because it brings along, economic prosperity for those regions, a couple to the east of Leeds. Obviously, data centre construction's been a big thing, but it's not been in the Yorkshire region generally, so that's great. In terms of logistics and manufacturing, so there's the demand for distribution units remains pretty stable, but it's led by end users. So there was a time of large speculative developments, which we're not seeing so much of. While developers are focusing on refurbishment and repurposing empty units. But one of the big issues about the logistics and manufacturing sector that we do need to sort of not lose sight of is power supply. So a lot of the uses that are getting put into these units are a lot more power hungry than they used to. So we need to factor that into projects because that can affect delivery. In terms of public and civic, so we work with quite a lot of local authorities, and they are generally all keen to invest and keep developing their towns and cities. But a lot of what they do is grant funded. It comes from a myriad of different funding sources. So as you'd expect, viability becomes a problem, and the issues that you touched on about political instability and whatnot. But there's a lot of there is funding out there, and there's a lot of people keen to do stuff. So that's fantastic. And then in terms of residential, so we talked about the general picture of residential, but obviously affordable homes and public sector housing does remain a key focus for local authorities, especially with lots of people with big estates that they need to think about, especially in terms of like decarbonisation and ongoing maintenance, etc. In the developer side, an area that we're not seeing so much on at the moment is purpose-built student accommodation. There was a bit of a boom of that in Leeds, for example. I'm sure there's still stuff out there and developers still in that market, but it does seem to be slowing down slightly. And also on your large schemes, there is a bit of hold up due to planning process and building regulation stuff due to the Building Safety Act. So generally a mixed picture, really, Gary. Obviously, exciting industry with lots going on, and it's just good to have a view of what's happening in all the different sectors when we're considering the economy.
Yeah, of course, David. Thank you very much for your insights there. Interesting what you were saying about data centers, because I'm sure I'd read that Elon Musk has said the ideal place for data centers is on craters on the moon. So if Yorkshire and Humber could be a close second for preferred data center locations, that would be great, wouldn't it? But not sure we can compete with the moon.
I wouldn't describe parts of Yorkshire as a crater on the moon, but less polite people might do.
Thank you. Right, okay, we're going to move on to another question. So this is one for Ross, please. And the question is, what challenges do you foresee related to funding and political changes?
Right, thanks, Gary. Nice, easy, light-hearted question to start with. I'm not going to get embroiled, hopefully, into politics. I think there's enough of that, and it's quite a divisive subject. We'll see people dropping off the call rather than adding on to it, I think. I just want to try and talk more sort of high level and how we see it affecting sort of decisions that we make as a business and maybe across the industry. I think that there's potentially a lot of political unrest on the landscape and on the horizon in front of us. Various changes could be afoot, not just in sort of individual authorities, but maybe sort of blanketing across quite a few broad areas. And what I would say this is creating is uncertainty. So uncertainty being probably the main word that I would put around sort of the political side of this question. What does that uncertainty create? Well, uncertainty unfortunately creates fear, and that fear can lead to opinions being formed and decisions being made, maybe not in a positive light. And what I mean by that is we're seeing that projects get delayed. So when we have stability, it means that we can generally look at the pipelines, we can look at the forecasts, and we can build around them. Clients know what they're looking to build. Because we have some of this change of political leadership on the horizon, we are finding that, if I could just make an example up, let's say that there's some funding comes in for a public realm scheme, and that's where that money would be going into, but there's a political challenge from an opponent on maybe education or a library's closed in the area. We're seeing a cautiousness to invest in that public realm asset, because it may well lead to criticism that it should have been spent on a library. Now, we know that those two things couldn't equate because the funding are completely different. However, Joe public might not know that. So the schemes are almost becoming political tools, and we have found that some of these projects have actually just gone on hold. It's easier to not build them, and hopefully if we maintain our political leadership, we'll take those forward. However, with the changes potentially in political leadership, that also leads to reviews. It leads to changes in priority. So we have experienced, and so have my other, I'll say, colleagues of civil engineering businesses and also contractors, where they're working on projects. It may be in an early designs capacity. Consultants will have the same issue. We're working through, we're gearing our teams up, we're speaking to the supply chain, and all of a sudden there's a change in leadership, there's a change in view, there's a change in policy, and that scheme can be pulled. Now that creates a huge issue for the market, and a huge issue for ourselves. So that is leading to, and as I say, the uncertainty, it brings it around staffing issues. You're not as confident to keep on employing, looking at apprenticeship models, looking at all your plant materials, which I know Mark's going to come on to in more detail. So yeah, so the political unrest or the political uncertainty currently at this moment in time is leading to uncertainty. And we are seeing that schemes are actually going backwards rather than sort of coming to the market. So I think that puts a big pull onto what David's just mentioned. And it's interesting because from a personal point of view, our business operates within that public sector. So we're very focused on how that sector in Yorkshire, well, particularly Yorkshire and Humber, how it extracts, how it grows and how it shrinks. So as it shrinks, we have to make certain decisions. However, there's a big sector pull that can happen to a lot of our supply chain. So if there is data centers being built and it's really core, key civil engineering schemes that they would be delivering, we may see a shift of supply chain move across, because again, they need to occupy their staff and operatives. So the uncertainty is not great, and it's worrying. And I think we'll talk about pipeline as we go through and the importance of it, but just information is key. And I appreciate that sometimes there might not be an update. Any update's a good update. Even if it's to say we don't know, it's moving back, at least we can move everything back ourselves. So there's a lot of uncertainty, I feel, that's out there at high political levels at this moment in time.
Yeah, thanks, Ross.
Sorry, in terms of funding, I think that in the north we've had a pretty good few years in terms of funding coming into the region, which has been fantastic. The only downside to that is it becomes the norm, and we all set our sights on that level of funding and that level of scheme and that amount of project coming through. And again, just because of this uncertainty from leadership and whatnot that we've just talked about, that again can just create a little bit of a uncertainty around the funding and the funding pots. What I would say is the world has changed massively in my career in construction. There used to be a set amount of money that would go to and I'm sure that everyone on the call knows this because I've experienced it. A set amount of money would go to an authority that have X amount to spend. You would know that it will be on particular type of schemes. You would get your fair share of that. So you could almost forecast backwards to see what you would be able to deliver the following year. The funding should be around the same, so it's consistent moving forward. Due to the funding pots that we see now, there's a lot of early visibility. We look at things at probably the same time that David at Wright, Levett, Bucknall will look at things, because there's a big fanfare that comes out that there's a new funding pot. There's a lot of schemes which are then pushed forward into that funding pot. It stimulates the marketplace. We have these huge eye-watering numbers which are put out there, and we all get excited and start to think, right, where's the opportunity? I think that from that, we need to then understand how that moves forward and how we access it, because from what we talk about to what comes out the other end of the machine can be two very different things. So I think accessibility of the funding is something that we need to concentrate on and maybe feed better information out into the marketplace. Schemes can fall at different hurdles of different business cases. That's fine. We just need to know sort of where they are. A clearer plan also on or better understanding to the market on sort of what's next. So there's obviously a lot of CRSTS active travel within the civil sector at the minute. What's coming next? Because we're looking ahead now and we have this visibility of 3-year funding streams. What's next? What's in that pot? What's going in the next pot? We're all gearing up to deliver X number of £1 million schemes. It can't just come off a cliff at the other side of it. There's got to be some sustainability going forward. So again, it's really a case of saying, what is the next round of funding that's going to be coming? So all in all, I feel as though we're just in a little bit of a moment at this period of time where there is that uncertainty, the political change, the funding, schemes not getting over certain hurdles in business cases, etc., which I know we'll talk about reasons why in other slides. And then what David's just said in terms of that sector pull, I think we've just got to be very aware of within the public sector that there is other factors that are out there, and that we do need to just get that information out to the contract and consultant base.
Thanks very much, Ross. That's interesting stuff. I think, as you've touched on there are going to be some golden threads that flow through these topics today. There are going to be key things that affect each other and so on and so forth, and it's all linked together, basically, isn't it? So within this theme, we're going to move on to the last question, which is going to be for Mark from MSF, and that is: so how might these factors affect project delivery, particularly for subcontractors such as yourself, please, Mark?
Thanks, Gary. I just want to build on a little bit what Ross and David have said, and probably put you in the frame of how it works for a subcontractor and what we require to really be secure or confident in our decisions to invest and really support project delivery. So with subcontractors, what we really need is confidence. And at the moment, as Ross and David have said there is an underlying air of an unstable market, maybe led by various tailwinds or headwinds, both politically, and there's obviously many challenges to different projects. And what that creates is a feeling of unsettlement and unease in the supply chain. And what that does is, in turn, that affects our investment decisions. And to give you an example, for an organisation like ours, to buy equipment or plant is normally a 12 to 18 month cycle. To invest in an apprentice, it's about 3 years. To invest in staff is at least 3 months to recruit and another 3 months to in turn embed them into the business. And how that then moves back into project delivery is what we really see is if we, as a subcontractor, typically, if we were working on a 12-month project, our period that we would be involved in that project is around 6 to 3 months. So what you can see there quite clearly is that for many schemes, the investment cycle of a scheme is shorter than the investment cycle on what staff or labour is. But what we have an opportunity to do is by having a very clear and pipeline is to create a pipeline that outlives the investment cycle. And that's what we need. We need to have that clear picture. We need to have that clarity so we're able to invest in people and staff. And what is the effect that we don't? Well, some of the effects that you'll see is that we end up hiring, we end up outsourcing work, and in turn, that drives up project costs. And as David said before, a lot of businesses are relatively subsector agnostic. So you'll see data centres or rail or other areas in the country where there seems to be a spike in construction or in spend or in budgets. And what you'll tend to do is you'll see naturally subcontractors will tend to gravitate in those areas and it'll be difficult to get them back. And then what that can do is either create a vacuum or a skills shortage, which is quite prevalent in construction at the moment.
Thanks, Mark. Just to probe a little deeper on this topic then, from your perspective as a subcontractor, what can you be a bit more specific on the economic pressures that are creating the most immediate challenges for you?
Yeah, so in terms of the economic challenges, obviously we've talked there about inflation, and that's reflected in the cost of equipment and plant that we're skewing, and the cost of materials, so trying to source materials early and fixing prices. So it's really difficult. And what you're seeing at the moment is this. There seems to be a number of projects, particularly major projects, where there seems to be a delay either in funding or schemes going to site. And what you seem to create this for subcontractors is a vacuum where we're not quite hitting our forecasts and we need to recover that money. And what we're seeing there is a spike in prices either further along or a real fight to try and recover those costs or moving into other areas. And that can create all sorts of economic challenges for subcontractors, both in terms of cash flow or in terms of margin as well. And without margin, we struggle to invest.
You've also touched on the ability to secure labour and plant and possibly other resources for upcoming projects. Again, how do you think the current economic climate affects your ability to do those things, to secure that labour and plant and the things that you need to deliver projects?
Yeah, so I think our business has had a particularly successful track record in recruiting apprenticeships and seeing that flow through. And it's something that we're very keen on and we champion. At the moment, we're 7% of our just over 200 staff are on apprenticeships. But when the certainty isn't there to invest, often apprenticeships are one of the first areas that get capped by businesses. And that in the long run, that doesn't address skill shortages and other wider social challenges. The things with capex and investment is what you'll tend to see is buying a new piece of equipment, machinery, plant can be an investment anywhere north of 100 to 250,000 pounds for one piece of equipment alone. And if you don't have that confidence to invest over 3 or 4 years in that piece of equipment, what you'll end up doing is either not investing and capping your capabilities as an organisation, or outsourcing and paying a premium to deliver that type of work. And what we all want to see is that sort of constant and steady flow, or certainly a much clearer picture over 5 to 6 years of where we know roughly what the market spend is going to be, and that will really articulate how we think we're going to be able to spend our money and really smooth out our operation over a more sustained period of time and bring us out this perpetual cycle of peaks and troughs.
Yeah, okay, understood. And then lastly, before we move on to the next topic, are there things you can identify in terms of changes within the industry, or what change in the industry would most help subcontractors such as yourself to navigate economic challenges and pressures?
Yeah, I think what would be really helpful is if there was a committed number of regional projects of significance, that a region that would commit to spending X amount of money in this region to deliver these type of schemes. Because when you drill under framework spend, another area that it's really difficult for subcontractors is what you see is, say, a figure of we're going to spend £300 million over the next few years on these type of schemes. But what does that really mean to subcontractors? You've really got to drill under that number. Is that going to be good for electrical subcontractors? Is that going to be good for bricklayers? Is that going to be good for concrete? Is that going to be good for tarmac? And really understanding that picture of what is involved in that work. So it isn't just a case of pipeline in terms of project. It's a pipeline in terms of the nature and type of project, because that is what really, really does affect. Because as you go down the pyramid, that's what is affected, because we become more niche.
Okay, thank you for that. I do apologise if if the screen has flashed on. I'm just trying to, I'm using two screens and I'm trying to refer to notes as well, and I think it does keep affecting the screen sharing. So I do apologise for that if that has happened. So thank you very much to panel members for your insights on the first topic. For those listening, you will have picked up on a bit of a theme developing around forward pipeline of work. So we want to focus on that in a bit more detail now. So we're going to start with a question, which is, what is your experience of pipeline and how much of a challenge is this in the industry? And that is going to you, Ross, in the first instance, please.
Thanks, Greg. In my role, I would say it's absolutely key. But no, I think pipeline is key. It allows us to build our strategies for our businesses. It allows us to build our business activities and then hopefully plan and achieve sustainable growth. If we know, say, for example, in Yorkshire, that there's a scheme maybe in the east of Yorkshire, but we operate more in the west, ahead of bidding that scheme, we'd also then want to know what else is there in that area. If not, we're having to move supply chain across regions. We'll have to move staff across regions. Maybe our material base is coming from a set place in the region, and ultimately that's unsustainable, and also more expensive to the client as well. So generally, if a business like ours, which is a large business but very regional, would want to be able to anchor across the regions that they operate and have different supply chains, different suppliers within those different areas across the region. So we can only do that by having the visibility of a supply chain, of a pipeline. With that pipeline, we'll go to our supply chain, we'll show them what work we've potentially got coming, even better when it's through framework, because it gives a bit more certainty that it's going to arrive. It allows the likes of Mark and his business to do all the things he's just said and to be able to plan around so they can be able to service the needs of that area. It might not be that contractor, because if they work for multiple people, they'll know that the opportunity's there. It hopefully eliminates some of what David mentioned with the sector pull, because people will know that they can continue to work within the public sector because that workload's there. So yeah, it really allows us to do so much more. I think pipeline was viewed as, why do people want to see it? We'll let you know when we know. But all of these things that it wraps around and allows us to plan our businesses a lot better and a lot clearer. Touching on what I was saying earlier in terms of the funding, because of the fact that we'll find that there'll be a mass release of detail and data when a new funding pot is allocated, and then we don't hear anything. That's key, just to understand. We appreciate that things might not get out past the outline business case. They might be stuck in land acquisition, or there may be service diversions. There might be all of these things that happen, but just that information flow allows us to be able to plot and plan and to resource sort of adequately for when those schemes come along.
Yeah.
I would say that I think that YORcivil has massively improved over the various frameworks. So I think the industry's improved, and what I mean by that is we actually find out that jobs are coming rather than them just landing. It still does happen, but there is a lot more visibility, and that's fantastic, and we're very thankful for that. I think a great addition to pipeline and visibility is the EOI stage. I think that, again, particularly the way that when an EOI comes out, it allows the opportunity for the contractor or the consultant to be able to see and understand the scheme. Great if there's then pre-tender meetings where the scheme can be discussed, particularly on some larger value schemes. But also, I think it opens up a two-way channel as well, which is important for the client. So it allows feedback to come back the other way. So you might be proposing to do something where there's maybe a massive lead in on a material. Someone might have done a similar scheme and said, well, actually, we've encountered this issue, or there's this way of doing it. So I think just having that visibility and that discussion really allows for everyone to have a better sort of position when we get to the starting point, when the tender does arrive or when we do get onto site. So I think that the only thing that we could continue to improve on, and it's maybe a shout out to the authorities for anyone who's on the call, is we see that initial funding in the schemes that are put forward for your active traveller, your CRSTS or whatever it might be, and then we see right at the other end when the EOI comes out or when the tender comes out, but there's a big piece in the middle. And I don't think we're going to lead anyone out to a firing squad if they've said that there's 10 schemes and only 5 come forward. We know that that's the nature of contracting and that's the nature of working through these projects. But it would be good to be able to track those and just to have a longer list. I think it gives more confidence in the framework that there's still a throughput of work coming. It gives more certainty in terms of, again, going back to the previous question, this political leadership, which is bringing some delays, the funding and uncertainty, which is bringing delays. If we know that maybe some of these existing schemes, where they are, if the timescales are moving back, if the timescales are moving forward, we can roughly just plot those into our works pipeline, which again allows more sustainability for a contracting base moving forward, which ultimately should provide a better service to the client. So all in all, I think it's getting a lot better, and it's a lot more visible. But like everything, we can still carry on improving and developing it.
Thanks for that, Ross. Just a quick follow-on question, and I know this very much depends on the individual parameters and constraints of a particular scheme. In terms of timescales and when you want to know about upcoming schemes and potential jobs on the horizon, do you have anything to say around that? What are you looking for in terms of understanding a future pipeline?
Thank you, Gary, because you asked us that yesterday and I'll run through and I couldn't answer it either. So I'll try my best. No, I think joking aside, I think that sort of a sensible lead in, as I say, when we've got everything, which is maybe an outline business case, feasibility, that's great. Just get them on a long list. And if the YORcivils teams can be updated by the authorities and they then can provide those general high-level updates into the contractors, that can be an ongoing thing. That can be through the quarterly briefing sessions that we have, and that just allows us to track them as they go through, like move through sort of the sausage machine. I think when a scheme becomes real, a 3 to 6 month lead-in can be beneficial, depending on the size of the project. Obviously, everything on the size of complexity. But if that EOI can come out with enough time to build in any feedback, any replies, it allows us to be able to gear up. It allows us to be able to maybe comment on if there's some scope and some fat in that front end. If a potential tender period isn't long enough, it allows us to maybe elongate that a little bit more. When everything is coming rushed towards the end, it becomes very difficult. And what I would also say is, I know you touched on it a little bit in your introduction, there's a shift of direct awards, which are great when you get them, but also it creates, and there's a shift in two-stage tendering, which we'll talk about, which is fantastic. That can tie resource up in a different way and can prioritize schemes differently to how it had previously. So if an authority keeps everything to themselves and then all of a sudden just drops 2 or 3 tenders, it sort of unbeknown to the market, they're probably not going to get the most competitive tender returns. They're probably not going to get everyone working on them because they've already got other schemes programmed in. So ideally, just given that visibility, 3 to 6 months, ideally a month, if it's an EOI beforehand, just allows everyone to be able to gear themselves up and analyze their own resource.
Yeah. Okay, was that the question you said, don't ask me tomorrow, Gary?
Yes, that was the exact question, so thank you.
No worries. Well, it was well answered, so thank you very much. Right, just conscious of time then, we'll move on to the next question. You have touched on this in your previous answers, Mark, but in specific reference to forward pipeline, we'd like to know from again, a subcontractor's perspective, how does forward pipeline affect your investment decisions? I think it might be an important thing for our client base to kind of understand. So if you could answer that one, please. And you're on mute, Mark.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, it's absolutely critical. I think for a business like ours, it's probably one of the most crucial metrics that we drive the growth of our business off is pipeline and visibility. And often what we're seeing is we're under the umbrella of tier one contractors. And fortunately for us, we have a lot of our clients who are very good at sharing their pipeline with us and helping us to shape what the future of our business might look like. But as an example, what we do often see is things like meet the buyer events, where you get meet the buyer events and you'll ask all these different businesses come together and they'll ask for certain trades. And that's good. It gives you an opportunity and an audience with your certain clients. But the problem sometimes there is those contractors are only shouting for the trades that they immediately need. Yeah. And what you've seen there before is our investment cycle. And our investment cycle outstrips the immediate need of those contractors. And I think at times it would be nice is in terms of the pipeline of work, is it was really declared and published what was involved in that pipeline of work. So, for example, is it a lot of paving works because it's involved in public realm? Is it a lot of tarmacking works because there's a lot of carriageway resurfacing works set to go ahead? Is it a lot of structures works? Is that because what I've often seen in the past with subcontractors, similar to ourselves, is we get excited when we read about record amount of infrastructure spend in a certain area. We gear up, we take apprentices on, we even open up depots in certain areas, and we get really drawn into it. And then what we tend to see is the first tender inquiry comes out, and we're lighting, it's for carriageway resurfacing. The second one comes out, it's replacement of a bridge deck. The third one comes out, and 9 months down the line, we've geared ourselves up to attack this area. And what we've realised is we've never really drilled into that number, or really been given any guidance, and we've completely misinterpreted it. And our investment case and our investment decisions have been wrong. And I think if we could really get a bit of sense of clarity on the type and the nature of works, it would be such a help to certainly regional subcontractors who are less likely to want to move out of certain regions. Yeah, which in Yorkshire, which is a huge region with some really big cities and a lot of infrastructure, but some of those businesses don't want to move, and they're a little bit like Guinness subcontractors. Sometimes when some of them move, they don't travel so well. All right, so they like to stay on where they are. And it's a huge decision for that contractor to go from 20 people to 30 people. And they can't do it quickly. And I think if we can really find what that pipeline looks like and we can really drill underneath and like Ross said before, we don't expect everything to happen. But if we could have a more underlying guidance of what's involved, I think it would be such a help for so many smaller businesses.
Yeah, and I think it's something we spoke about briefly yesterday, Mark, is in relation to this general point around investment decisions and where to target resources, that kind of thing. We touched on a point around bidding resources and bidding availability, didn't we? So, you know, when pipeline is uncertain or you don't necessarily have sight of it, could you just give us an insight briefly into how you would allocate your project estimating and bidding resources? And does that become much more selective, I presume?
Yeah, so it works in two ways, really. So the first is, obviously, Ross touched on this before about having, even for the tier ones, they would like advance notification of tenders coming through. Generally, for subcontractors, the first, often we know about many schemes is when it lands in our inbox. So it takes it a little bit by surprise. And obviously, depending on the nature and the size of that scheme, it can involve, you know, a sizable amount of resource to address it. But what happens at a moment like this is when there's an underlying unrest in whether schemes are going to go to site and confidence in the pipeline, what you'll tend to find is a lot of subcontractors will tend to have a scatter approach. So they'll price work all over the country, all at different places, and they'll take the first opportunity that comes in. Sometimes that can be at the detriment because they'll take what comes in and then 3 months later, a perfect opportunity lands much closer to home and now they don't have the resources to do it. If the pipeline's more defined and refined and you have greater visibility of it, what you'll tend to do is subcontractors become more refined and more focused on where they are. And then what you'll find is that greater consistency of subcontractors in that region. And what you'll probably find in that is prices will come down because it's cheaper to deliver closer to work. In relation to actual bidding itself, if you're bidding for everything, you only have a finite amount of resources and it can become overwhelmed by what needs to happen as well. So I think by not having clear visibility, there is a number of impacts that a contractor can face, a subcontractor can face. The other one, of course, as well, is procurement of materials. So certain subcontractors manufacture their own materials, or certain subcontractors will try and bulk purchase materials. And that can have a real impact on not only your bottom line, but how competitively you can tender for schemes. It is very much economies of scale. As an example, MSF buy 100,000 meters of ducting at the start of every single year. We buy 20,000 meters of cable. What we commit to in terms of those quantities can affect our prices by about 10%. So the lower our investment confidence is, or investment sentiment is, the less we'll do that, and that price will be pushed back on. And I think that's why it's really important that we really have an understanding of what's involved in that pipeline of work and where, so we can really guide our principles on how we invest, what we procure, and what we deliver.
That's great. Thank you, Mark. Some really good points made there. Okay, I'm going to move on to the last question under this theme, so forward pipeline of work. And the final question changes tack a little bit, and this is for David. What do you see as the key resourcing challenges that you think the industry is facing and that can be influenced by forward pipeline? If you could give us your thoughts on that, please, David.
Yeah, sure, Gary. I mean, as a consultancy company, obviously, our product is a service delivered by people. So I'll primarily focus on resourcing in terms of staff, if that's all right, Gary. I mean, we're talking construction that we've got an aging workforce, and obviously none of us can avoid getting older, but it is getting worse in construction. So I mean, since 2000 to now, the number of the workforce that's over 55 has doubled as a percentage, if you like. So so the proportion of the workforce at over 55 is getting bigger, which means there's a problem coming, if you like. And in a typical year, about 70,000 people leave the industry. About 30,000 apprentices start, but 40% of those do drop out. So that is obviously a challenge, is getting those apprentices to stick with it. And there'll be a number of reasons for that dropout rate. And there'll be a number of different ways that we can help that. Obviously, not everybody that enters the industry is an apprentice, but the net effect is going to be that every year tens of thousands of people are leaving the industry, which is a big number. Interestingly, I did a bit of research for the question, and the majority of leavers statistically are actually self-employed specialists. So, your plumber that would come to your house and that sort of stuff. And that does line in with anecdotally what we see people doing, I think, on sites is, they'll start with a big company, they'll do their apprenticeship, they'll learn the trade, and then they'll move towards self-employment towards the latter end of the career. So it means that we don't feel the effect or you get much publicity really of these people leaving the industry necessarily. But I think that it does create a vacuum, if you like, as to, as people move in to fill those roles over time. All of that links to a skills shortage, really. And this is something we often talk about in construction. And I think it can be a tricky one for us to understand because, in truth, there are builders, surveyors, architects, project managers. We're all out there when we are all looking for work. And we don't generally hear of a project not happening because there are no builders, okay? But the low quantity of us out there or people in the industry means that getting the right person with the right skills in the right location at the right price, which all needs to come together for a successful project, is harder to piece together. And this leads to low productivity because you've got the wrong skills. It might lead to low competition, or it might lead to low quality if you've not got the right person with the right skills. So there's people out there, but the skills shortage leads to poor project outcomes rather than projects not necessarily happening. So it's a bit blinded, really. So zooming into the consultancy sector, because it's obviously what I know a bit more about. We're a firm of construction consultants. We've got 1,600 staff across the UK, and most of these are cost managers, project managers, building surveyors, health and safety professionals, etc. And all of these professions have a well-established training route that we need the people to follow. Now, in one way, that's great because we know where our people come from. There's a standard of quality that when they're qualified, they'll be able to deliver. Obviously, we do we train our people as well, but when they come to us, they've got a level of education and understanding, which is great. Problem with that though is it means that the tap can't be turned on and off quickly. If you want somebody who's followed that route, it takes a number of years. And generally, I think Mark touched on the same point, which is that if a project has a need, the job will be done before you've been able to fulfill that need. Do you see what I mean? So we're all resourcing projects with people, plant, materials that have been conceived and initiated because of a project that might happen. Nobody, maybe some of the large mega projects, but most of the time we've hired a person to work on projects we don't know about yet. That generally is the way it has to work.
Yeah.
And so that's that's quite an interesting parallel, really. So in terms of hiring people into the business, when we're not necessarily training them up, we're bringing in staff that are already experienced. We found that post-COVID, it was a pretty vicious market that was basically due to supply and demand. And since this period, the pent-up demand when people stayed put during COVID and many companies grew rapidly seems to have leveled out. It's still a candidate's market, but it is a lot more reasonable. Where it's tricky is when you need people in a key sector with a key skill, or in a specific location, outside of the key cities, for example. That's coming up, for example, in like sectors like defence, where you might have a large project not in a city centre, if you like. So you need 40 people to work out somewhere. So that can be tricky. But in terms of so that can be tricky. But generally, the people are out there, and but it's just making sure that we're getting those right skills in the right place. That's the challenge for us. Something that's in terms of resourcing challenge, Gary, that is interesting is that where our people have come from has changed in the last 2 or 3 years. So if we go back 5 years, it was very normal that we would hire a large quantity of graduate QSs, project managers, building surveyors every year, and we still do. But, and this is happening across all the universities, the number of, we find it anyway when people I've spoken to, is that the number of people wanting to study full time on these vocational courses is going down. But the number of people wanting to do degree apprenticeships is going up. And that's exactly what we see. So when we've attended a few university careers fairs in the region, and there just feels like there's less candidates banging on our door, if you like. But when we advertise for a degree apprenticeship, we'll get hundreds of candidates. And whether that's cost of university fees or the changing climate, I won't theorise. But what it does mean is that the incubation period's longer. So I won't. It's obvious with what we've talked about in terms of pipeline, the effect that has. The good thing is that it means that the people that have followed those routes can be some really good members of staff, to be honest, because they've had, it's generally a 5-year period by the time they do the degree and go through the chartership route, etc. They've had 5 years of experience with us. They perform well academically because they're able to apply. And in truth, whilst it's a university course that the people are on, it is a vocational job. So that's backed up by education. So, but encouragingly, I spoke to somebody at Salford University, and they're seeing that if you combine the degree apprentices and you combine the full-timers, the numbers are actually going up, which is great. So people are interested in the industry in these sorts of careers. And it perhaps is because we're able to offer these degree apprenticeships. So you might have a student or an A-level person that's interested in going to university. They don't necessarily want to invest in themselves full time, so they'll go into the career that is able to offer a degree apprenticeship, which companies like us are. So maybe it means that we'll get some good people in the future. So that is encouraging. So in terms of just to summarize, really, in terms of resourcing challenge, then the fact that we're investing in people and having to invest in people for a long period before they're effective means that you might find that we're having to take a business decision to invest for the long term. So that's a big change for us.
Of course, yeah.
It comes back to pipeline, but we do take a view, and we do our own forecasts, and that's part of running the business, I suppose. But the more information we had, I suspect we'd be bolder, because if you've not got the information, people are naturally a little bit conservative. If you have got the information, you can act on it. So that's probably the main challenge that we've got
takeaway
going forward. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that, David. I think, what's apparent to me across the board, whether it's investment decisions in terms of plant, equipment, machinery, whether it's investing in people, and whether it's general business operations in terms of where you want to win work and where you want to operate, it all comes down to confidence, and that confidence is inspired, isn't it, by a good forward look of what's coming ahead and what you can expect to bid for and potentially win. So that's what it's all about in this theme, really. It comes down to your confidence in the market and in clients. Okay. Conscious of time, we are going to run over our allocated slot. I believe that's okay, unless somebody from YORhub's going to tell me off. So we're going to carry on. We've got one more theme to cover, which is a general overview of what we see as procurement trends. So we'll try and canter through this one a little bit. I understand it's okay if we overrun by a little bit anyway, so we will carry on. So this first question is for Ross again, and we're going to ask, what trends are you seeing in terms of procurement options?
Right, great. Thanks, Gary. As I say, I'll try and keep this as brief as I can. I think there's been a real positive change. And again, sorry, I sound like a broken record. I'm going to keep on harping back to the other answers that I've given. I think due to the funding changes and to ensure that schemes pass through all the viability stages, they're certainly given on programme and costings and actually get them onto site. More on your capital project schemes on the YORcivils framework, maybe I think lot 3 over 5 million. We're seeing a lot more two-stage tendering, which I think can only be a benefit to both the contractor, the supply chain, but ultimately to the client. What I would just quickly caveat that by saying is it certainly doesn't fit every scheme, and there's still absolutely the place for single stage competitive tenders, fully designed, which come out, and I think that all contractors would still, particularly in the civils market, would still be more than prepared to be pricing competitively in a competitive environment. But if I just focus on that two-stage model, I think that one of the biggest things that it gives, and we have seen this across various client bases and various frameworks, we've gone through a full framework where there's been schemes which have got maybe the funding spans longer than the framework that we're on. And they've gone from outline business case all the way through, got to tender, haven't hit the levels or the scheme's a lot more expensive than what they had anticipated at the very start. And we've gone like snakes and ladders. We've gone in the mouth of the snake and we're all the way back to the bottom of the board and we're starting again. And we've priced schemes several times through a framework and they've never actually got to the ground. So the pressure's then to get back on the next framework where to deliver these schemes, which brings uncertainty to the client because there can be a whole different set of contractors can be on there, different number of contractors. But also there's a lot of aborted time and cost. And obviously no one likes pricing the same thing several times for it not move forward. So what we've seen and what we've learned, and I think that what we, particularly in my role at Seeker, what we try and encourage and explain is that benefit of the two-stage model, and whether that be two-stage or two-stage design and build. And it's really just trying to get someone on board early so that the contractor can build their team below them, so they can, all the things that Mark's talked about in terms of visibility of workload, geographical areas, all these things we can talk about. We can provide that certainty back into the supply chain, which again gives them the buy-in to us to robust what we're doing and putting forward. But most importantly, we can work through the scheme with the client and with the consultant, and we can look and say, is it viable? Is that program that's being proposed, is that where we're going to get to? with it. Is the scheme going to be within that budget? All of these things can be looked at. People can really get the teeth into those projects. I think one of the big things is it diverts away from a traditional 6 to 8 weeks, 6 to 12 weeks of your pre-construction stroke estimating team, looking at the scheme, looking at the risk, pricing it, and then if you win, hand over to the delivery team, to actually getting the construction team involved. So you start getting the people who are delivering the scheme, living and breathing it at that early stage, in stage one, bringing their expertise. As you say, you get the supply chain involved, they bring their expertise into it. And so we really can then look at value engineering in the truest sense, and not just of, we need it to be cheaper. Can we value engineer it? Well, that's not value engineering. That's just making something cheaper to try to fit within the budget envelope. It's looking at it and saying, actually, we can do this, we can do that, we can do the other. Have we tried this? Can we phase it in a different way? It also ensures that if there's any stipulations which are linked to the funding, which often might get missed and does happen, they can be worked through to ensure that that isn't a showstopper at the end once you're ready to go to site. It also allows for maybe where a contractor might have more resource in terms of putting road open notices in, maybe dealing with stats, or just advising the client and helping them along that journey. You get all that expertise. And I think that one of the big things which is sort of which is sort of triggered that is the lack of resource sometimes within the local authorities compared to where we were 10, 15, 20 years ago, where there was full engineering teams who would deal with this. So it allows a bigger team to be created with a lot of expertise, but because you've got a commitment of the appointment on that single stage, it should then allow for better buy-in and a better output to be moved forward. So I think that the two stages is huge. I think that you can also have that as a two-stage design and build, where you can bring in the expertise of not just the consultants, and you have a very wide knowledge base in terms of the YORhub consultants there. They may well be supporting from a client side. A contractor might have a designer who we worked with on a lot of similar types of schemes that they can bring in. You get another level of expertise that comes on. You can really challenge the design in a positive way. We all want to be working positively, but challenge is good to make sure that we're all getting to the best answer and to the best option. So it just brings a variety of different options to the table. I also think that the benefit that particularly on larger capital project schemes, so again, I'll just class that from sort of your £5-6 million and over. The world's changing. Social value is a lot more prominent. Again, probably as divisive as your first question that you asked me on political change. Social value can be viewed in a lot of different ways. And what I mean by that is it place-based? Is it project-based? Are we actually getting something out of the other side of it? Because ultimately, we want something that benefits the communities and where we're working as in the contractors and what impacts on that. And if we're on a very short time scale and focused on the program, getting it within the budget envelope, things can be sort of missed or left behind. So what it allows us to do is it allows us to maybe break away in individual teams and really go and look at a scheme and say, right, what can we do while we're here that's going to really benefit that project, that community, that local authority area, and that gets built in. Now, then, because you've got your supply chain on board, you get their buy-in, you get their expertise. So that can only be a benefit. And then the final thing that I would say on it as well is carbon, climate, carbon reduction, whichever way we want to call it and talk about it. It's becoming. We've all got we have targets for carbon reduction. We have an even greener team within our business, a team of employees who are focused on looking at our carbon reduction and setting the plans. There has to be a realization of what you can do as well. And I think that to look at different products, to look at different techniques, different materials, all these things needs to be done at a very early stage. It's very difficult to do it once you're committed and you're about to start on site. It might be an increased cost implication. It might be a program increase. However, it might be what's right for the project. So if you can focus on that at a very, very early stage, it can only benefit the project. And then the final thing I would say, and it's not really on a procurement option, it's more just probably use this platform as an opportunity to speak to any of the clients which are out there. Getting the information back through the tender process is absolutely key. Tender queries are raised. If those questions aren't answered, it just means that things can't progress and can't move forward. So again, what that can mean is, it can mean if you're in a competitive tender environment of the clock started and we've got a certain period of time, anything that isn't answered in that period is just adding risk onto ultimately the price that's being submitted, because the questions aren't known. So one, I suppose that's a bit of a cry to please try and come back to us with the information, but two, on them bigger capital project schemes where there will be more questions because there is more risk and there is more complexity, it maybe eliminates that because your questions aren't as time critical because you're working as a team together towards a solution. So in a nutshell, two-stage tendering, two-stage design and build is something that we're seeing a lot more. We would personally encourage that a lot more, and I think that it gives a lot better solution to the client for certainty to try and make sure that your timeline from your outline business case to your on-site to your delivery is met, and if not, expectations can be managed as we go through that process as well.
Thanks very much, Ross. Very useful insights there into general trends that you're seeing in procurement options at the moment. I have to apologise. It is down to my poor timekeeping. We are essentially running out of time, or we are over time and starting to eat into the next session. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to put the next couple of questions on screen. Mark, you were going to answer question 2, and David, you were going to give us your thoughts on question 3. If we could just have a very brief set of comments from both of you, starting with you, Mark. Ross had touched on some of the inconsistencies of approach there, particularly in reference to social value. I know you had some thoughts on that. If we could just have, say, a minute from you on your thoughts on question 2, and then I'll go to David for his final comments on the last question as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Gary. I think one of the areas that we all identify is that we've got an aging workforce and there's a skills gap. And in Yorkshire alone, there's an estimated 10,000 person skills gap in construction over the next few years. We're only going to address that with a consistent approach. As you've said there before, MSF only employed 200 people, and we're one of the largest subcontractors. So to address that, it needs to be a collective. It needs to be a collective of subcontractors. It needs to be a collective of contractors, and it needs to be a collective of client. And I think if we can form a consistent approach by developing some regional priorities that would address certain social or environmental impacts that need to be addressed over the coming years, I think what you'll find is a far more holistic approach that will really drill into and address some of the huge challenges that not just the industry faces, but our wider region faces as well.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mark. I know we've spoken particularly around social value when we talk about inconsistency. I think it's the fact, isn't it, that frankly, we deal with a lot of local authorities, not exclusively local authorities, but different local authorities approach their social value requirements differently, and something that clients may not realize, or they may do, because it can be obvious in some cases, those social value requirements are placed upon the main contractor and they filter through down the supply chain to subcontractors such as yourself. So the people delivering a lot of those social value commitments are actually the subcontractors. So we wanted just to make that point today, didn't we?
Yeah.
Okay. So David, apologies giving you the short straw. Just to sum up, there were some quite interesting things around advancements in digital that you're seeing in the industry, and tangible results that we can expect to see as a result of those. If you can give us a brief 1-minute overview of your thoughts on that, please, that would be much appreciated.
Yeah, I'll talk in bullet points, Gary, and forgive the brevity. So data has become a much bigger thing. We collect a lot more data as construction professionals. We use a lot more data as construction professionals, whether it be building surveyors, doing surveys, whether it be cost managers, reviewing benchmarks. There's a lot more data involved. So that's become there's a new set of skills we require in using, analysing, interpreting and presenting that data. That's a big shift that we've seen. In terms of design, obviously in the last 10-15 years things have gone from 2D drawings in CAD, people drawing things in 3D in Revit or whatever, now to people properly modelling, if you like. And with that model becomes a lot of opportunities. For example, using the model for quantity extraction, using the model for putting into for use by facilities managers. And because of that, information management as a service has become something that we're heavily involved in now, whether that be policing the fact that that data has been populated properly, whether it be producing reports for people going forward, or whether it's basically thinking about how that information is going to be used going forward, or doing stuff like clash detection. And then the third big area really has been, or it is now and is going to be, is automation of human workflows. So what I mean by that is, I think for the last the last 15-20 years, we're all used to using computers as electronic pens and paper, if you like, as big calculators. We're doing the work on a computer. I think anybody will have all played with ChatGPT or whatever, and you could go in there and ask it to write you a specification for a house. You can use things like similar services to do you some drawings. So it's not a million miles away where I think the role of the professional will change, where the computer is doing the work and we're the people providing the thought and the oversight, rather than us using the computer to do the work. I think that isn't 50 years away. Do you know what I mean? It will have happened a long time before that. So us adapting to that change is probably the biggest advancements in digital I think we're going to be seeing, as a very broad summary, Gary. So
yeah, I appreciate that, David. I think we'll take away the positive from that you're basically saying in a few years we can all retire earlier and work less because the machines are taking over.
That's exactly
That's what I heard you say. Right, I just want to extend my thanks to panel members. Thank you very much for giving up your time and offering your insights into those various topics. Apologies that we've run over. If we had the time, we were going to open the floor to questions from attendees. What I would say is, if anybody would like to raise any questions specifically for the panel, I can take note of those and engage with Mark, Ross, and David afterwards, and I can get back to you separately if that's what you wish me to do. So thanks again. Apologies for running slightly over. Feel free, guys, to stay on the call for the rest of the conference if you wish, or if you have other commitments, you're able to leave us there. So I'll stop sharing at that point and I'll hand over back to Mike, I think, briefly to introduce the next session. Thank you very much.
That's fantastic. No, thanks for that, Gary. Yeah, really interesting session. Fascinating what's coming out. I mean, certainly I'm hearing a lot in terms of the pipeline, and that forward notice of work is something that, and also to kind of add into the dimension, is something that we've been working on in terms of working with the educational establishments in the region who are there equally asking for pipeline, because they want to know where they should be training students, what disciplines, what trades are going to be in demand. So that pipeline from authorities, from clients, really is critical, and the more notice, the better, and we fully accept. Certainly as a ex-project manager, I'm acutely aware the schemes get pushed back, they change, but having that information really is so valuable. As Gary says, we are a little bit over time, so I appreciate there is one question, but all I would say on terms of that one question is I'll probably pick that up in my session on day 2. That'll be something that I'll be covering, so we will crack on. So if I just remember how to share my screen. Share, that's the one. So just really briefly, just to introduce Mark Ives. So Mark is our program manager for YORcivils. The screen is refusing to let me move on. But there we go, it's working now, that's better. But Mark has worked with us for a couple of years now, in terms of delivering projects and procurement for both East Riding Council and his predecessor. Mark's one of our specialists when it comes to project bank accounts as well. He's got his specialism. His area of specialism has always been civil engineering as a incorporated engineer. And Mark, I'll stop wittering and I'll let you come in and tell us the latest in terms of the YORcivil Major Works 2 framework.
Yes, thanks, Mike. Yeah, let's just see if all that year's experience can actually help me get something on the screen. That'll be helpful to start with. Let's see if that'll run. And is that okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Right, thank you. Well, yeah, good morning to everybody on the call at the moment. Yeah, I also found that very interesting session this morning. My thanks particularly to people like Ross that we deal with on YORcivils on a regular basis for feeding into that and confirming an awful lot of what we do see on a daily basis to do with things like programs and pipelines and trying to give foresight of what's coming up next. This session really is to focus on the new civil engineering major works framework, the second iteration of it. I will say right from the start that it hasn't been awarded yet, but it is imminent. It's literally in the next couple of days. So it's a particularly opportune time to be able to run through the changes and updates that have been made. As Mike said, I'm the YORcivil Programme Manager. And for East Riding of Yorkshire Council as a construction framework manager, which just means really I have this sort of overarching role for YORcivil across the region rather than just in the East Riding, working with various project framework managers from Sheffield and our own authority. And I'll highlight who they are later in the session. So again, yes, thank you for being on the call this morning. Like Gary, it's difficult to go back to doing this type of online event, I think, and speaking to a screen. I hope it comes across well. But we've just got sort of used to meeting people face to face again and talking to them, and have changed the approach for today. But hopefully you'll still feel free to get in touch with us if you need to about any aspects of this particular presentation. This is to confirm that it's to focus really on the YORcivil Major Works 2 framework that's about to start, but an awful lot of what I'm going to cover does relate to the other civil frameworks and YORbuild. So hopefully you'll still find it of interest for any projects that you may be considering accessing the frameworks for. But this particular framework is designed for schemes over 10 million in value. So it's really the larger contractors dealing with the larger schemes. What am I going to cover? Well, I've been through the welcome introductions really, but I'm just going to give you some context of the framework really, just look at what YORhub is and its structure, because I'm aware that there's probably, or there could be people out there that are not familiar with the framework and YORhub and how it works in practice. I'm then going to look at the strategies and initiatives that form part of those frameworks. And again, the common themes in them all. So it wouldn't just apply to the Major Works framework. I'm then going to run through the specific details of the Major Works 2 framework itself, look at how it's been developed and the scope of works it can deliver. And then that will also focus or take you through sort of the tendering process we've carried out and how we've got to this stage. And then I'm going to change a little bit at the end to what we normally do and just look at practical use of the framework really. Now we can work together or hopefully work with clients that are on this call to help you deliver some of your major projects. I'm conscious of time as well, and if we've got time at the end, I'm sure we can deal with some questions. But obviously, as Mike says, we will respond to them anyway outside this session if we're short on time. So as I said, we're just going to initially look at what YORhub is, and as you can see from this particular slide, it shows the offers that we present to clients. So it consists of an organisation that was set up by East Riding of Yorkshire Council, Sheffield City Council, Leeds, and now North Yorkshire. That was originally Scarborough, but because of the changes, and we also had Rotherham involved initially. And it's now, well, it's probably getting up to 25 years, or very shortly will be 25 years in existence, when government offered funding for local authorities to try and improve its efficiency and the way it procures projects in the region. So these are the organisations that stepped up or put themselves forward to try and assist with that approach. So you can see the key themes that form part of the hub, and the three sort of separate frameworks, if you like, or the headings, or the branding that takes place for each type of framework. With your build, as you can imagine, looking at buildings, YORcivils, the civil engineering projects, and YORconsults, the more professional, professional standing, your architects, QSs, that type of thing, project managers, that can be accessed separately. The reason that you've got sort of all four authorities listed under your build is because build is split into 4 specific regions across the Yorkshire and Humber. YORcivil's the third iteration of the normal framework that delivers projects up to 10 million, is split into 2 regions, with Sheffield managing the south and west, and ourselves at East Riding managing the north and east, and that's reflected in YORconsult. Mainly because there's probably less suppliers and a little bit less turnover on those frameworks than your build. So that is split into 4 to promote more suppliers, really. This is how we fit into the national picture. The YORhub forms part of the National Association of Construction Frameworks, which is an organisation that sort of helps us work together with the other frameworks in the region. The reason we think this works is because it then sort of promotes local SMEs and regional suppliers, and tries to give and focus work in that particular area rather than looking at the national picture. Although, having said that, of course, the major works frameworks that we're talking about today do tend to deal with the larger contractors that do deal more on a national basis. But it gives us a forum and a voice at national level. And hopefully you can see from that the general turnover of YORhub is one of the largest. So it is an interesting picture to see how we fit into the national picture. Excuse me. This gives you an idea of the clients or the people that access the framework to date. I think it's quite an old slide now, and these aren't all applicable to YORcivil. But you can see, because you can see things like housing associations and general police and blue light authorities on there as well that don't access YORcivil on all that regular basis, but have done because they may have some sort of major car parking projects or some civil engineering or public realm works rather than just doing new buildings or offices. So it is quite a mixed background of clients, but it gives you an idea of the sort of numbers that we deal with. Some access on a very regular basis, some very rarely, and some once every now and again, but we obviously try and give all the same level of service. That's all I wanted to cover today, really, on the background to YORhub. Obviously, if you wanted to know more or the establishment of it or a little bit more information about anything that I covered today, do have a look at the YORhub website. There's an awful lot of information on there and a very good handbook that you can download that gives you detail about all the frameworks that I'm going to mention today, but particularly this one that will have the new suppliers on in the coming days. We're just going to move on now then to look at the strategy, or these are the themes and initiatives that are built into particularly your build and YORcivil, but are also form part of Consult. And these are particularly relevant to the major works contractor framework, as you can appreciate. But I'm just going to look at these in a bit more detail in the next few slides, but at a practical level of how we would use them under the framework, because we've got the subject of employment and skills to cover. That again was an interesting subject in this morning's session. How we try and work with the supply chain under the what's known as YORsCEP, it's the Supply Chain Engagement Programme. How we look at one aspect of social value and economic regeneration through what we call the For Good Fund. And then the framework also has various targets and themes built into it around sustainability and reducing waste. We also have a theme on BIM and assistance with that, but I don't intend to cover that in a lot of detail this morning. So looking at those initiatives in more detail, what I've done here is really showed you what the framework has built into it in the way of targets and initiatives that a contractor is expected to achieve on a particular call-off contract. So if this one was on the new major works framework and it was around 10 million in value, you can see the targets that we've built in there that we would ask the contractor to achieve as part of an employment and skills plan. This is a document we prepared and worked with clients on to try and actually identify what can be delivered and what can be maximised on any particular call-off contract. And as you can imagine, for a scheme the size of this valley, that may be a couple of years in duration, there is an opportunity to build in more long-term benefits. And again, that's been highlighted this morning, that sometimes it takes longer to train people than a scheme could last. But when you're dealing with schemes that are probably in the region of 30 to 60 million, under the major works contract, there is an opportunity to achieve that through its longer duration. So these are the particular targets. They do go up higher for larger contracts, as you can imagine. So looking particularly at apprentices there, we were expecting at least 70 weeks of existing apprentices to be delivered, and taking on up to in the region of 6 new apprentices as part of that project. Now, as I said, this can vary, and we work with clients to try and vary, because it depends on the nature of the scheme, what's actually being constructed, whereabouts in the region it is, and how that can be promoted. So these are flexible, but at least it shows you what we've told contractors we expect to try and achieve. Historically, YORhub, have had well over 2,200 members or trainees moving to full-time employment as a result of framework call-off contracts. So it does have a history of being achieved. And so I would look at this as an approach to use on your call-off contracts. And is one of the social value aspects that's built in as a mandatory requirement under the framework. That's not to say that a client has to use it and can look at alternative approaches, but this is something that is mandated that contractors do have to deliver if we require them to do so. The supply chain engagement program, again, that's been mentioned this morning, because we do now have at least an annual event that we try and move around the Yorkshire and Humber region and get the main suppliers that are appointed to the frameworks to meet with local SMEs and what local councils want to see from, in the region of their own suppliers being part of any major projects in their region. So as well as doing that annual event, which breaks down barriers and allows those suppliers to speak to the main contractors, we can also do these on individual projects and have done in the East Riding region to again try and directly address what major contractors want to see for delivery of local work. We do get an awful lot of feedback from subcontractors that say they just can't get on the lists of major contractors, they can't get involved in schemes. But again, this particular program does break down those barriers. And then we do find that the major contractors do say, well, we would like to promote it because we would like to know who's in that region, who could help us deliver this particular scheme. It's a large scheme. We know that local suppliers are often more competitive. They're in the region. They're more bought into what we're trying to do. And as a result, we do want to know who they are. So it is something that is continuing. It's still being developed, and it's being looked after by our colleagues in Leeds. And hopefully the website and the way that works will actually continue to improve in the future. Economic regeneration, again, we've mentioned social value a few times this morning. This is another way that the frameworks achieve this automatically. When the contractors now are appointed to the framework, they've, as part of their bid, given us a value or percentage of the value of a particular scheme that they would contribute to the For Good fund. And this works very much like the lottery fund, in that once we establish a certain level, we then advertise this to the regions that have carried out work under the frameworks and invite local community groups and good causes to apply for funding from that pot. It also works at site level, in that contractors that come across good causes and community groups themselves are aware of particular projects in the area can also approach us to deliver their social value obligations through the individual contract they're carrying out. It's been nice to actually update this slide from some older photographs with some new ones at the bottom there, because that's particularly relevant and up to date. I don't know if people are aware, as part of the Jots Lodge scheme in Beverley, which is a major project for us, Graham, as the contractor on that, assisted with the community centre in Beverley, and that photograph of the presentation there is literally from last week. It's obviously contributed a significant part of Graham's social value on that particular project, and is the subject of DIY SOS programme in the coming months. So I would look out for that, and let's just hope we get some mention of the frameworks in there as well at some point. But it is a particularly relevant, up-to-date project. Sustainability, well, again, that's sort of mixed bag of delivery requirements and optional measures that can be built into call-off contracts. And as we've mentioned, it's to do with wildlife protection, waste reduction, and carbon reduction. And we have some targets there that you can see are built into the framework. And we are developing carbon reduction KPIs that have been introduced, hopefully in the coming months, and hopefully Michael will help me explain a little bit more about what they are in the future. I think it's important to note that all the information on these last few slides to do with the initiatives all form part of the questions that we ask contractors when they are appointed to the framework or as part of their framework bids. How are they going to support these themes initiatives? How are they going to deliver them in practice? So they do have a meaning, and they do have, they are required to be delivered under each call-off contract. So to move on to YORcivil itself, then I just thought I'd try and give you some idea of how we've developed things going forward with YORcivil and the history to get to the point where we are today. Back in we're obviously on the third iteration of YORcivils, which is to deliver works up to the £10 million value. And the reason we've first set up the major works framework that will expire next month is because during YORcivils 2, there was a lot for delivery of works above 10 million, but that capacity and the advertised value that was put out for that particular framework for that large lot was used up with one scheme by York City Council, the York Central scheme that's taking place there. So in order to maintain that offer to clients, we set up a separate framework just to deal with schemes over 10 million. This has proved beneficial, and it's also worked for your build in that it makes it a little bit quicker and a little bit easier to set up each individual framework because there are less suppliers that apply at that specific time rather than having a completely multiple lots framework. So as it says there, it gives you an idea of the sort of number of schemes and turnover we deal with. So YORcivils 2 that expired back in 23 now, at the end of its 6 years, delivered 213 projects at around 550 million. And you can see that the current framework that's running 4 schemes up to 10 million in value that commenced in July 23 is online to probably deliver somewhere in the region of the same amount of work. We've got 132 schemes in the pipeline to date, approximately 260 million. So YORcivils, when that the major works framework that was set up in December 2019, hasn't delivered anything like as many contracts or the value that it was delivered at. But as you can imagine, and what's been discussed again this morning, this seems to be partly due to budgets when they're announced, and then how schemes are broken down when they get to individual clients and authorities, and whether they end up being all small schemes below 10 million or major projects above 10 million. Not something we have particular control of. It's very difficult to forecast, which is why there is a pipeline of work, and some of those schemes will move into the YORcivil major works too. But it's not as extensive as the lower value works. What else have we changed then as we moved into the second generation of the major works framework? Well, nothing as far as the procurement regulations are concerned. So even though the new 2013 regulations came into force back in February, this framework was advertised before that, before the new regulations came into place. So this one is still under the public procurement regulations 2015, but makes very little difference to the way we operate in practice or what clients would have to take into account. Obviously, we've tried to, as we develop frameworks, each one we renew is to align them better with each other, so it's better aligned with the requirements of YORcivil 3 and your build, to make them more consistent and easy for, hopefully, for multifaceted contractors to read and understand the contracts because they're consistent. I mentioned about budget value as well. This particular framework's advertised value has been reduced to 1 billion. This is still a very big figure. But when you think that the previous framework was advertised at 2 billion, but has delivered probably less than a quarter of that amount, I think it was important to revise the overall advertised value. Not something to get hung up on, though, I don't think, because I think most frameworks do advertise values way above what they think they can deliver. This is to prevent any sort of issues with reaching the advertised value and then having to re-advertise the framework early. What we want to do is try and maximise the benefits and duration of a framework being in place, that a contractor can get maximum return on what we think we can deliver through that framework. One of the major changes we did make was to use the CAS questionnaire that's been produced by UK Build, that's replaced the PAS 91 British Standard requirements, and that's become more standard use across all our frameworks. But this was the first framework to change to that. I'll come on to this in a bit more detail, but there is now a new direct selection process that's been introduced into the call-off procedures. We've always had the option to go direct by rotation to the list of contractors that are appointed to the framework, but there is now an option for clients to go direct to a supplier. Not someone they can just pick out. They do have to produce a business case for that, but I'll come on to that a little bit more in coming slides. We've improved the understanding and use of rate cards, I think, as we've gone forward. This is really the process of tying call-off contracts costs to the framework costs and prices that the contractors have submitted as part of their framework tenders. And again, I'll come on to that in a bit more detail. And as we improve the resources and experience within the YORhub team, we are improving the way now that we monitor the framework, that we look at how many are responding to expressions of interest and how many are responding to individual call-off tendering processes. And that includes improving the management of the employment skills outputs and for good fun to make sure that these are being delivered for each individual client. The new framework's regional coverage remains the same. So this is the same area that is covered by the two separate YORcivil 3 frameworks that cover the north and east and south and west of the region. So there's no change there. Previous iterations did go up to the Scottish borders on the coast, but there was no demand for that as such. So it now just extends into North Yorkshire, even though that shows you still the separate regions of North Yorkshire. That is now all one unitary authority. And we do extend down into the Sheffield LEP region as authorities that Sheffield will work with, and we hope to get more business development possible approaches in that area as part of the new framework. What does it cover? Again, this hasn't changed as you'd expect. All civil engineering type projects can be delivered through the framework. Contractors were asked to give us various previous experience of previous contracts to show that sort of range of different types of works. So traditionally, it's mainly highway works, new build and maintenance. In East Ryde in particular, and I think Rotherham as well, there's been an awful lot of flood alleviation schemes, major earthworks projects, as part of areas that have been badly flooded over recent years. So that includes sewage and drainage works, hard and soft landscaping. Public realm schemes have become very popular again, I think, as people try and regenerate town and city centres. And we have done sports and some environmental works under previous frameworks. Integrated transport schemes are things like your bus station and integrated transport with other local links, possible links to railway stations as well. And we do an awful lot of bridge work and structures works through the frameworks. It states that some building works can be included because, as you'd expect, if you were doing a major civil engineering project and there were some sort of toilet blocks or other buildings that needed doing as part of that project, you wouldn't go separately to your build to do them as separate contracts. They can all be delivered under the same framework. And that works vice versa with your build as well. If you're doing a major new office block or school or something of that nature, and it has a civils car park, you wouldn't particularly separate out the civils work into a separate contract. They would be delivered under the same one. So there is some crossover in that respect. I will cover design and build in a bit more detail because it was interesting listening to Ross again about two-stage contracts and the like. And I'll come on to that in a bit more detail. But essentially, you can include any amount of contractor design in any call-off contracts from the frameworks, everything from partial design right up to full design and build. But there is an important distinguishation to make between, I think, the two-stage process under the framework and what is a two-stage process under an individual contract. And I'll try and cover that a bit more detail as we move on. So this is the detail that most people like to look at, I think, from other authorities. and the different options they have of accessing contractors under the framework, and different approaches they can take. So looking at these in detail, if we start at the bottom right there, this is the one that contractors probably like the most, in that this is a price-only mini competition type call-off contract. And as it says there, really these are only used by clients if a particular scheme is very well defined and it's low risk, and they're not expecting an awful lot of changes to take place under that contract. So traditionally that tends to be used more for purely surfacing contracts or things of that nature, where it's just large quantities, large costs, but very straightforward operations. So that is one option you can use through the framework. Moving up from that one is the more traditional option, which is your classic price quality mini competition. So again, we have templates in place that show you what type of questions that you can ask a contractor as part of any quality approach in the way of programming and method statements, the people that are going to be on the scheme. But it's a combined call-off with the price. So that's the sort of more aligned if you went to an open tender. But obviously doing that through the framework allows you to go to a short list of contractors rather than to the completely open market. We then move on to the top two approaches, which are to deal with direct selection really, but they're more to make sure you can work with an individual contractor. And these are the approaches that probably will be looked at more by clients on the major works framework because of the size of projects and whether a client has a particular experience in dealing with major schemes, knowing how much it costs and how on earth you can work out how long the program would be for some of these major projects. So there's two distinct ways you can do that to get to a single contractor. There's the price quality mini competition 2 stage, which really is like I think some people refer to it like a beauty parade, so that instead of just getting the next contractor on the list, because under this major works framework there will be 8 contractors appointed to the framework, instead of just getting the next one on rotation, you can go through a sort of elemental price and ask some quality questions to actually establish what would probably be the best contract or the most interested contractor in working with you as an authority. It does take a bit longer, and so it is a separate stage to select that contractor, but then you're able to work direct with that single supplier once you've selected them. If you didn't want to go through that process, the top left-hand box there sort of shows you can go direct to a contractor from the start if you're comfortable to do so. Now that involves 2 separate ways now. So the one that's always existed is you can go to the next contract on rotation, because as you work through call-offs, it would take 8 individual direct selections to actually get through all 8 contractors. So on the major works contractor, it's unlikely that we'd all get an opportunity, but it would depend on how many call-offs came through the framework. If you have a particular contractor as a client that you've worked with before, or it's the next phase of a scheme, or you've got another way of justifying how you would want to access a particular contractor on the framework, you are able to do this now through a type of business case to show that your own rules have been met and what the justification is for going to that particular supplier. It's been very important to bring this in under the YORhub arrangements, and say this is the first one to have it built into its terms and conditions from the start, and it brings us very much in line with what other framework providers are doing in the region, and we do feel that it will bring more schemes to the framework. We are going through a process of consulting with all the suppliers on our other frameworks at the moment to try and make that consistent across them all. But as we renew them, it will become an automatic built-in process in any case. So we're hoping we can build this into them all from in the coming weeks. So I hope that makes sense, because there are various ways you can call off here depending on where you are with a particular scheme and what your requirements are, and whether you want to work direct with a contractor. But for major projects, it's certainly a big advantage to be able to work directly with a contractor. Just to confirm then, really, that the call-off options remain the same. Everything now is based on the NEC4 form of contract. The framework itself is, and all call-off options are. And the template documents we have available for you as clients are all based on the NEC4. I mention NEC3 because I know there are some authorities out there that still use that. I would hope if you decide to access this particular framework, you would use it as an opportunity to try and move on to NEC4. We could help you with that because the pricing models are a little bit different. And I think it is important to try and move on to the latest versions now, as I think it's been out something in the region of 7 or 8 years already. So it'd be worth moving on to NEC4. And as I say, the pricing model is different. So if you still wanted to use NEC3 through this framework, you can. But for any call-off contracts, you would be asking for additional pricing information that we can't tie back to the original framework submission, and so would leave it a little bit open to the market to produce those figures. But of course, we could talk about that in detail if you wanted to go down that route. I mentioned design and build earlier, and the possible use of two-stage approach through the framework. That's not really to be confused with the fact that you can use X22 under the NEC4 Black Book to do what is effectively a two-stage contract through an individual contract. I would never advise going that way, but I know some clients do, because if you can set out all your requirements from the start and set up a full contract that includes all your requirements for a design and then what you want to do in the way of construction in a contract from the start, then you could go down that option and build X22 into your contract. And that is still allowable under the framework, that's fine. But the real advantage of the framework is to use the two-stage process where you can select a contractor very early on from the start. And then if you wanted to work with them on completing the design, you could appoint them under the professional services contract, or in some cases the short contract, because they do appreciate that if they're asked to do sort of survey works or groundworks as part of that design, that it just suits it better. So you can use a contract to set that up and get your design completed as part of that stage, and then only enter the construction contract once you've understood the price, the program, and developed a contract that you're happy with. So it gives you far more flexibility. In my opinion, is a much better way of using the framework and improving your procurement processes. But again, this is something we would talk to you about if you're looking at that option. So again, how have we got to this stage, and what have we been through to get to this point? As I said, the tender was issued back in February before the new regulations came into force. It was returned in May, and then we've spent some months looking at those returned tenders and assessing them. We now have internal approvals complete, and the standstill letters were issued on the 21st of October. So contractors that we intend to appoint have been notified. That standstill period has now expired. We've dealt with some inquiries, but that will now be awarded literally in the next couple of days. So while I'm not able to put a slide on at this stage that shows you who those suppliers are, that will appear on the framework in the next few days. Sorry, on the website in the next few days. So if you're interested, do keep accessing that to have a look at what it is, and we will be contacting clients that have accessed the previous framework to see if some of the projects that were on the pipeline will be maintained and carrying on. And obviously, if they're interested in using the new framework. Just to give you a little bit more confidence, I think, in how these things are set up, I just wanted to run through how we assess those tenders. Hopefully, this will be familiar to most people that are involved in the procurement of their own works. But it was a single-stage open tender approach, assessed in 2 stages. Effectively, the first stage was looking at all the minimum standards. So we do set up what they're required to have in place, and that we do monitor in the way of finances and insurance and etc. and various policies. And that's related to the new Common Assessment Standard questionnaire that's for construction. Those that pass that element were then assessed on their quality, price, and social value contribution bids, and you can see the percentage weightings there. And then hopefully as well, I've listed the questions that were asked there. There was 4 distinct questions with various subpoints in it. So they were assessed on things like how they would go about design, social and environmental value. So hopefully, again, you can see how this is now tied back to the themes from the framework that you'll see on the website. So that we asked contractors directly how they would approach and deliver those particular themes under the framework, as well as asking about their pricing and the information that will be used in rate cards for clients. I've chosen to put this particular slide in because this is one we usually use with clients once they want to access the framework, because I think it's probably the clearest way of showing what costs we look at under the framework when we appoint them. And that it's not, even though we put sample schemes in for them to price against, they're not asked to price the entire works and, as you can imagine, all the ins and outs of a particular contract. We couldn't do that as part of a framework tender. So there has to be the flexibility to allow contractors to price individual call-off contracts, but also tie them back to various components of cost that they've priced in the framework. So as you can see from here, what I'm looking at there, if this is a call-off contract, the sort of ready box on the bottom left-hand side there, the works activity itself is demonstrated by competitive market pricing. Now, if that's a mini competition call-off, obviously they'll go to their suppliers to get the best price to put forward to clients. And if it's working directly with the contractor, they can show you how they've established a market price by demonstrating various subby quotes or showing you some sort of business case that shows why they want to use certain suppliers. And that can be open and transparent with clients. So it's a particularly powerful way of seeing how a particular tender price is built up. So then on top of that, you have the site overheads and off-site overheads and profit. And these are the elements that you can tie back to the framework rate card information, because this is information that we have asked for as part of their framework bid. So things like the NEC fee percentage we have, and these are not to be exceeded. So as it says, they can't go higher than the rates they've put in, but they can go lower depending on the particular job. And they've given us various supervisory staff rates and accommodation costs, all of which can be used as a benchmark, scalable for the size of scheme you call off, but again gives you some sort of tie back to the framework to show that they're demonstrating they're still pricing at the level they priced the framework. So we can look at that in a lot more detail with clients if they need to provide framework pricing information. But you can see from that particular diagram how we build up the cost, or how we look at cost under the framework. So really just conscious of time still, I think we're going to be about right. I don't know if we'll have some questions at the end there, but I just wanted to, again, look at the practicalities of using the framework and just show clients, project managers that may be on this call, really what we can offer you when you want to access the framework. So what we can do, even though authorities often have their own template documents for tenders and contracts, is we do have a fully sort of framework compliance document that we can show you that's full of lots of notes and information that helps you complete them. Alongside that, we have a standard employment and skills plan template. So again, we can show you how that's populated from what we've asked them to do under the framework to what they can deliver under a particular call-off contract, how you can tailor that to suit your scheme. We do have template instructions to tenders templates. So again, this can depend on your own rules, but the important thing about that is it does show you from the various call-off options that I showed you on the earlier slide, how you would write that into a document, how you would assess it, what questions you can ask, and the various different options, whether you're looking at price only or whether you're looking at a price quality bid. We have the contractor rate card information that I've explained on the previous slide. That will help you to understand their overhead costs when they put in any call-off contract tender, so that you can compare them and benchmark them against the framework. And we do this through what we call the contract's preliminary book, which is also issued with your tender documents normally. So the contractor completes this with his resource levels and his NEC fee and any other prelim type costs that you can compare against the framework. And obviously, hopefully, we're here to provide you as much as advice and support as we can as a framework organisation. I think one of our major selling points, if you like, as a framework, is that we are local authority people, practitioners. So we set up these frameworks. They are set up by local authority for local authorities. So hopefully, you would find our support and information helpful. So that's what we can sort of provide you with if you want to access the framework. What do we expect from you? Well, again, highlighting what was discussed earlier in the first session at this conference, we would love to find more information about your forward plans and pipeline of works. I think this is generally improving. I was particularly pleased that Ross felt that it was improving under YORcivils, because we do now try and issue this on a quarterly basis. and through what we call an expression of interest stage. So as soon as clients or any project managers out there, as soon as you tell us about a particular scheme, we do try and notify the contractors and give them as much notice as possible as to when it's likely to come out to tender. And that form also includes various questions that contractors say they would like to see in any inquiry to know if they're going to be interested to bid for that scheme. So the sooner you can approach us, the sooner you can discuss the issue and notify contractors that you intend to put a contract out through the framework, the better. And just give you more security of more tenders if you wanted more tenders, or again in direct selection. Again, the more notice we can give, the better, so they can give some genuine feedback on how long it would realistically take to get some of your schemes to the point of awarding a contract. And you as a client are not committed to using the framework at all until such time as the contract is awarded. So I've explained what the expression of interest forms is, I think. We'd also ask during any call-off project that you complete RAG reports on a quarterly basis, so we can see how schemes are progressing under the framework. And we do ask for feedback on all call-off issues really, but also as part of post-completion KPI, so that we can monitor the themes that we've mentioned earlier and find out really how the project went in practice, to see as the people in the middle, if you like, how we can help both clients and contractors improve going forward. And obviously, things like today and the attendance at the conference that we welcome clients to helps us to speak to more of you on a global basis rather than individually. But of course, if there is any more questions or anything you want to know about the framework or YORhub in general, do please get in touch. That just brings me on to the last slide, really, which is just to give you the information about the YORcivil team. As myself and Stephanie Wright, who you'll be hearing from in the next session, framework managers in the North and East region, and in the South and West, Gary, who you've already heard from, Nadine and Bradley manage the YORcivils in the South and West, and all the contact details can be found on YORhub and with our direct emails, so do please get in touch if there's anything else we can possibly help with. And that brings me to the end, Mike.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Mark. I think that was a really good sort of summary of obviously the framework, but also it's it's worth highlighting that because the frameworks are all aligned, you know, the offer and the support and those elements which are embedded within YORcivils are within, as you say, they're within Build, they're in Consult. So if you're working with us on a number of schemes, hopefully you should be seeing a consistent offer from ourselves, and you'll quickly become familiar with what we're able to provide you with. One question that did pop up during the chat, which I did put an answer to, but I just wanted to see if you had any sort of additional comment on this, Mark. So local authorities are receiving significant funding from the regional government authorities. There's output required from funding bodies as a condition of grants, which don't necessarily tie into the default YORhub social value outputs. And as a comment, it would be beneficial if some work is carried out to align this better. Now, I've mentioned that we have identified this as an issue. We did a lot of interviews with users and suppliers earlier in the year, and this was picked out as one of them. In my session on Thursday, I'll be talking about how to amend the YORhub social value outputs to align with specific funders' requirements. But I just wondered, because obviously in civils jobs, there's a lot of external funding that comes through from DFT and other bodies, whether you had any comments or thoughts on that.
Well, I think, as you say, Mike, you'll probably cover it when you debunk some of the myths on Thursday. But I think what I would say is the frameworks are very flexible, and I think what clients get hung up on is they see that the framework has been assessed on 50% quality, 40% price, and 10% social value, and they think that's fixed. So when you come to call off contracts, they think you can only look at 10% social value. That isn't the case. You can vary that dramatically, and it would depend on what aspects you're looking at. I think obviously some clients go, well, what can you give me in the way of social value? We say, well, you've got employment and skills and the for good fund built in automatically. What else do you want to look at? Is there anything else you would like to look at in the way of an assessment within your call-off, and we can build that into the price quality assessment model. And that is very flexible. I think you can go up to 50% because you've got to ask at least 2 questions under that. I'm getting into a bit of detail now, but you could go up to 50% just based on social value, or as little as 2, 3, 4% if you really wanted to. So you're in the position where it's not fixed by the framework. It is something you can determine. And in some respects, it's talking through with the client, what do they think they're looking for in the way of social value? What do you think you can achieve? And that the contractor's contribution you can assist with in helping them deliver their requirements by pointing out certain projects, or is there anything else that you want them to look at? So yeah, I think that's important. It was a good question because it is a lot more flexible than you think. I know some clients have a minimum 20% to 30% social value requirement now in their procurement, and they think that the framework only allows them to have 10, but that's purely the financial assessment that was carried out to get them onto the framework. It's not what you have to do on call-off, so you can vary that quite dramatically.
No, that's brilliant. Thanks, Mark. And I think that it's one of the challenges as a framework team, because we deal with a whole range of clients, ranging from people who don't really have anything in terms of requirements in social value, except that they want to comply with the Social Value Act and other legislation in the area. So that they are looking for us to provide them with this is the standard set of information, and if you use this, you'll comply and you'll be okay. Through to people who have done the work and do have their own strategies and their own requirements, and we've as you say, we've had to make the frameworks flexible to allow for the alteration to fit quite a big range of needs.
Well, that's it, particularly with the something like this framework where it's over 10 million. As you say, the potential outputs and what you can achieve on it is very high. The social value contributions are quite high for that, and contractors are generally looking for opportunities and ways they can deliver that, because it's included. They would probably do that anyway out of the social corporate responsibility funds, but they know it's a requirement under the framework. They have to work with our for good fund manager to try and identify opportunities. So yeah, they're more than willing to work with a client. So again, if you work direct with a contractor, you can have those discussions. It's a little bit more difficult when you're doing a mini competition, but I think in theory, there's nothing stopping you varying it as much as you wanted to.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. No, thanks, Mark. And I mean, I would always kind of, the underlying thing I would always encourage people, if you've got specific needs, or if you're having specific issues with or foresee specific issues with the framework, then have a conversation with us. And because the odds are we have faced this situation in the past, and
probably
we can talk
certify
about how
we're
to
not
deal with
AI,
it.
aren't we? We are real people. We've filled in all the questionnaires about not being a robot, so yeah, hopefully we'd be able to help.
Yeah, absolutely. I've ticked the box. I'm not a traffic light. No, it's fantastic. Thanks so much, Mark.
Cheers, Mike.
So just going back to my slides very briefly. So our final session of the day is with Stef Wright in the YORcivil team, talking about the new Procurement Act, and specifically sort of detailing how it kind of affects construction professionals. In terms of introducing Stef, so Stef's one of our framework managers within YORcivil, but she also leads our in-house team procuring cyclical maintenance contracts. So Stef, probably in all honesty, does more day-to-day procurement than the rest of us who deal with procuring a very big framework once every 4 years. She's a specialist in terms of the common assessment standard and the person that we go to for advice on it. She's a practitioner for the Procurement Act 2023, which anyone who's managed to get through that course is is impressive. It's a very good course, but it's very lengthy. I will stop wittering on and hand over to Stef.
Thanks, Mike. Mike's been very kind, and now I've got to try and work the IT.
I should say, and no doubt this is one of the sessions where we may well get some Q&A. We do, obviously we'll review and we'll respond as best we can. when it comes to responding to specific queries about any legislation, we do always reply to those, but we often want to take those questions away and ruminate to make sure that we're giving you a proper sort of advice on it. So do appreciate if there's some questions that come out today, we may want to hold on to, and we can feedback potentially on at Thursday's event, depending on times.
Okay, is that sharing okay?
Yep, spot on, Steph.
Perfect. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for sticking with us and attending this session. We are going to be talking about the Procurement Act, and we've called this a practical guide for construction professionals. It doesn't quite roll off the tongue as well. But my name's Stef Wright, and as Mike said, I am the YORcivil Framework Manager for the North and East area. A little bit about me. Mike's covered most of it already, but I am based at East Riding Council. I've worked with the team for about 12 years now. And as Mike said, our team lead on the procurement of over 60 long-term repair and maintenance contracts for the East Riding. So we cover lots of M&E, council house repairs, that kind of thing. We renew approximately 15 each year. That number seems to be going up as we're getting new contracts. So it's probably inching towards 20 a year now, so quite a lot. We provide advice in relation to below threshold procurement, as well as working on the frameworks as well. So before we start, I'd just like to add that this presentation is meant for construction professionals. It doesn't contain procurement advice. I am happy to answer general queries, but specific advice should be sought from your own procurement or legal teams, because I would only be able to advise from an East Riding Council perspective. And if you are based at East Riding, you can see us separately to this. So before we go into this slide, I thought we could just try and have a quick practice. So hopefully you can all see the raise hand button somewhere on your screen. So if you are watching this while eating your lunch, and I can't get to it now, I would like you to raise your hand. But unfortunately, this is not working very well because oh yes, I can see it now.
It's happening.
Yes, lots of people raising their hands. Fantastic. I will say I'm very jealous, and I will apologise if anyone can hear my stomach rumbling, because I am not eating my lunch. But I have had mid-morning snacks, and anybody that knows me will know that food is very important to me. So if you could all press the hand again to take your hand down. So I would like to know, what is your experience of the Act already? So if you've tendered or awarded a project under the Procurement Act, please raise your hand again. And if you would like to share your specific experience, whether it's good or bad, please add it to the Q&A, and I will be looking at that. So just give a couple more minutes. Okay, so a few people, but it doesn't seem to be many. Okay, that's useful to know. So a quick overview of today's session. We know there is an awful lot of information out there and training in relation to the Procurement Act, but sometimes I think it's hard to pick out the details that do affect the day-to-day working practices. So this session is just aiming to identify some of those details, but it is based on our experience of tendering under the Act. So first, we'll look at the key changes between the Public Contract Regulations 2015 and the Procurement Act 2023. So this will include changes to timescales and the different notices. We'll have a look at assessment summaries, quick look at the Procurement Review Unit, and finally the Finder Tender and Central Supplier Directory. So, key changes between PCR 15 and PA 23. There are a number of key changes, but as I've said, I am focusing on those which affect the day-to-day working practices. So the issue with the standstill letter no longer commences a standstill. Under PCR 15, you did send your standstill letter, and that was your standstill period commenced the next day. Now you need to issue a contract award notice. So you do issue assessment summaries, which we will come on to later, and then instantly or very quickly issue your contract award notice, and that notice is what starts your standstill period. We no longer refer to meet. Contracting authorities are encouraged to, oh, do apologise, it jumped too far. They are encouraged to look at a wider range of criteria beyond just price. So we now refer to the most advantageous tender, or MAT. And previously, tender notices were uploaded to Finder Tender and Contracts Finder. So this has now been reduced to a single portal, which is just Finder Tender. But suppliers are now also required to register on the central digital platform. And we also have a centralised debarment list. There's a number of changes to timescales. So we've changed from a 10 calendar day standstill period to an 8 working day standstill period. So in practice, it's the same, but rather than the confusion over our bank holidays and things included, it makes it very clear it's 8 working days. There are amendments to the minimum timescales for tendering, as I've shown here. And although the open tender minimum is 30 days, it is increased to 35 days if you don't publish all your documents at the start. So that's something that you need to be aware of. If you're going for your 30 days, then you do need to, or 25 days if it's electronic, but you do need to publish all of your documents at once. If you are going for the competitive flexible procedure, you might have a separate participation or pre-selection period plus multiple tendering periods. So these timescales do actually apply to each individual stage. So you will need to build that in. When it comes to your standstill, Mill and Reeve have provided a very useful calculator. It takes into account public holidays. So in the case that I put here, although the standstill would technically end on the 25th of December, because of the public holidays, the earliest date of award would be the 30th. So we find that really useful, just to kind of double check our calculations, particularly over Christmas and things. So yeah, I just thought I'd share that, and there is a link here. Okay. So it's important to understand the full project life cycle. I'm sure everyone here is familiar with it, but I still thought I'd go through it anyway. So we start with identifying the need for a project. We develop the business case, the specification, and after this comes identifying your procurement route, and then you've got your tendering, evaluating and awarding your contract. Then you're on to managing your project, and then your final review and feedback. So this brings us on to the notices, and then we'll revisit this slide and show where they fit within the cycle. So we've got 17 notices under the Procurement Act. There are a number of dynamic market notices, which I won't be discussing today. So we'll be looking at the open tendering. So above threshold, you have a pipeline notice. This is mandatory for all contracts estimated above £2 million that are expected within the next 18 months. And it must be published within 56 days of the first day of each financial year, so by the 26th of May. However, we know in practice, we don't always know 18 months in advance, or even 12 months in advance, or even 6 months in advance. So as soon as you are aware of it, this notice must be published. It includes basic details of your future procurement, planned dates, etc., but it is basic. And they do say it may be a single notice, including all your procurements, or individual notices for each procurement. At East Riding, we can't see a way of doing this as a single notice, and other feedback that I've had confirms that everybody is of the same opinion. So yeah, we're doing them as single notices, and it seems like other people are too. we have the preliminary market engagement or PME notice. It's only used for formal PME, and it includes details of how people can participate within that PME. And if your PME notice is not published, but you have undertaken market engagement, you must explain why within the tender notice. There's a planned procurement notice. It's not mandatory, but it can be used to reduce your tender period down to 10 days. If you are using it, you must publish between 40 days and 12 months prior to the tender publication. So you can't put out the planned procurement notice and then put out your tender a week later and reduce your timescales. It must be at least 40 days prior. It includes details of your future tender, but it's a lot more detailed than your pipeline notice. And then you've got your tender notice. So it is mandatory, and it includes details relating to your tender, how people can participate, where to find your documents, etc. And you do publish your tender documents at the same time. Below threshold, again, it's the same tender notice, but it's only for notifiable projects, so that those are above 30,000 for the below threshold. And they're not for procurements where suppliers are pre-selected. So if you have some kind of tender list or a framework, you don't need to do this notice. It includes details of the tender and how to apply, exactly the same as the above threshold, sorry. And it's published before your tender is published elsewhere. I've also included a reminder of the current thresholds for works and services, including VAT and the notifiable threshold. These do include VAT, and they are updated every 2 years. So the next time they'll be updated will be January 2026. So back to the life cycle. I'm going to start showing you how the notices fit within a life cycle. So we have the pipeline notice, includes details of your project, providing it's above £2 million, and it might be published before your business case has been completed. Might be published after, it just depends on how quickly you manage to get these done. You have a PME notice, generally done before your specification is completed, or it might even be before it's started. Just depends on how much information you require as part of your PME. Planned procurement notice, this might be done before or after you've chosen your procurement route. And then your tender notice is obviously a pre-tender notice, so this is where this goes. Your award notices, so we have a contract award notice. So again, these are above threshold. This is published as soon as your assessment summaries are issued, so you must issue your assessment summaries first, then your contract award notice. This then commences your standstill period. It's also required where you're making a direct award or an award under a framework. It includes details of the tender and your successful suppliers. You've then got your contract details notice. So there has been some confusion between the contract award notice and the contract details notice. Confusingly, the contract award notice is actually your standstill notice, and the contract details notice is your award notice. So it's published following the issue of your award letters within 30 days. If your contract is worth over £5 million, you are also required to include a redacted copy of that contract. Performance notice, these are published at least once in each 12-month period during the contract term, and this assesses your KPIs that you've set out in your contract. If your supplier has breached the contract and that results in a termination, award of damages, a settlement agreement, anything like that, a performance notice must also be published within 30 days of that breach or failure to perform. So that's a really important new notice. And then termination notice, that confirms termination but that's for any reason. So it can just be that the contract has expired or you've terminated for any other reason. You must publish that notice within 30 days of the end. And then below threshold, again, you've got your contract details notice, only for notifiable, so those over 30,000. You don't need these for framework call-offs as long as they're under threshold. And again, it includes details of the tender and successful supplier. And transparency notice. So these are used for direct award due to special circumstances. So if you are awarding directly under a framework, you don't need to publish a transparency notice. But it does include details of the direct award, including your reasons for that award. So back to this slide. So we have the contract award notice published at the same time as your assessment summaries to commence your standstill, contract details notice, or your transparency notice, if appropriate. These are issued to formally award the contract. Your contract performance notice, issued every 12 months at least during your contract term. And then your termination notice issued at the end of the contract. So hopefully that just shows you where these fit in. A couple of other notices, a procurement termination notice. So if you have issued a tender notice or a transparency notice, but then decide not to go ahead and award the contract, you must publish this procurement termination. Payment compliance notice, there's been an awful lot around about it at the moment, just lately. It is likely to be published by your authority's finance department, but we are waiting for further clarification on this. My advice, and I'm sure it's something that you're all doing anyway, is that you ensure you keep good records of all individual payments made so that if you are asked for this information, it is easy to access. And then a contract change notice. So where modifications are to be made during a contract, so if the value increases or decreases by more than 15% for works or 10% for services, or where your overall term is increased or decreased by more than 10%, you must publish this. If the change results in the contract suddenly exceeding 5 million, then a copy of the modified redacted contract must also be published, again within 90 days. And if a value increase results in a below threshold contract suddenly becoming above threshold, it's referred to as a convertible contract. And again, a change notice must be published for this. So the final slide on this, procurement termination notice, it might be issued before the tender commences or before the award. But as long as you have issued those notices and haven't yet awarded, it can be published at any point during that. You've got your contract change notice, which obviously goes here, and the payment compliance notice are popped on the outside, as it does depend when the reporting period falls during the term of your contract as to when it's published. So hopefully that all makes sense. So on to assessment summaries. So these were previously named standstill letters under PCR 15. Section 50 of the Act sets out the requirements to provide assessment summaries prior to the issue of the contract award notice. It must be sent to all bidders and shows scores received and the reasons why that score was given. The information should not be a repeat of your scoring criteria. You've already told them how you're going to score it in your tender. So you do need to be specific about what the tenderer did or didn't provide to enable them to understand those scores. Previously, we gave information as a comparison to the successful supplier, and it was all about showing the relative advantages of the successful, but that's no longer required. So now what we have to provide is a copy of the tender stack and a copy of the successful supplier's feedback. And this should be redacted for confidentiality where appropriate, but it does need to be provided. If the supplier has been rejected for any reason, you don't need to send them an assessment summary. but that supplier must be informed in writing as soon as possible. And there are a number of templates online if you don't already have one set up. The Procurement Review Unit, or PRU. So they have responsibility for oversight of the Procurement Act. And in practice, many of us will have little to no interaction with the unit, but I think it's important for us to know who they are and what they do. So they're split into 3 services. Firstly, we've got the Procurement Review Service, which has been in place actually since 2011, and they deal with complaints from suppliers regarding procurement processes, and they make recommendations to the contracting authority. They can also refer a case for formal investigation if it does find what it thinks might be a serious breach. Secondly, we have the Procurement Compliance Service, which undertakes formal investigations to ensure contracting authorities are complying with the Act, and then it will make recommendations back to the contracting authority. And reports of any of these investigations are published on the .gov website. And finally, the Debarment Service. This is actually split into 2 teams. So we have the National Security Unit for Procurement, and they manage debarment based on national security. And then there's the Debarment Review Service, who manage debarment for all other exclusion grounds. So if a contracting authority exclude, replace, or remove a supplier from a public procurement, they must inform the PRU, and they must include details of the supplier and the reasons for the exclusion. And then when they are added to the official debarment list, they will appear on this form. As you can see, it's currently blank, but I do advise that you check it prior to award of any contract. If the exclusion ground is mandatory, then the supplier must be excluded. If it is discretionary, then the contracting authority must undertake its own due diligence to determine whether to exclude that supplier or not. And finally, onto the Find a Tender and Central Supplier Directory. So the new Central Supplier Directory is mandatory for suppliers when applying for public contracts. Each supplier registers, provides information relating to their firm, and then they receive a Public Procurement Organisation Number, or PPON, as we refer to it as. This information must be kept up to date, and then when bidding, they have to provide this information to the contracting authority. And there's 2 ways that we can receive this. So the first is via the tendering portal. If your portal allows, suppliers can provide their unique share code, and that's linked to their PPON number, and the information is available for review via the link. If your tendering portal does not offer this service, which your tender may sell, which East Riding are currently using, it doesn't, then you must request the information directly from suppliers, so they can provide a PDF download of that information for review. And if you're unsure, I would advise that you speak to your procurement team or your re-tendering supplier. And the Find a Tender service can also send notifications for open tenders that suppliers might be interested in. So when they're logged into their account, they can search for current opportunities, save the search, and opt to receive emails when notices are published. It's just something that's worth pointing out when you're talking to your regular suppliers. And that is it for me. We're on to questions.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Steph. It's slightly mind-blowing when you see just how many different notices there are, and appreciating that some of them are for DPSs, but even so, there's a lot of increased transparency under the new legislation, isn't there?
Yeah, definitely.
No, absolutely. There was a couple of questions that came up. I think the first one about Micah's downloadable templates, I think that's possibly in relation to the social value discussion we had previously, but that's a useful comment. Thanks for Stephen. There's also one about downloading the slides, which I think my colleague Julie's going to answer. In terms of the Act, though, I think what I've, we've certainly noticed that prior to the enforcement of the Act, there was a massive uptick in terms of notices issued as people desperately tried to get procurement started under PCR 2015 rather than BA 23. And I'm getting, I'm certainly seeing an amount of queries from users asking to use frameworks, and I suspect it's partially because they're worried about complying with the Act.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is don't be afraid of it. We went through exactly the same. We instant panic. It's all changing. Nobody likes change. But actually, once we've started working through it, day to day, not much has changed. And a lot of it, as you say, by using the frameworks, it's taken a lot of that away from you. So it's just another reason to come and talk to us on the frameworks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thinking about also in terms of the mandatory KPIs or over certain values. I mean, with us working with the National Association of Construction Frameworks, we're trying to have a consistent set of KPIs, because what we want to try and avoid is suppliers being asked for one set of KPIs from a certain area, and then as soon as they move into a different local authority area, they've got a different set of KPIs to respond to. So it's only one of the things that we're trying to align across the country, ideally. But certainly when we've been talking to users, this has probably been the one of the biggest things that people ask about is, do you provide Procurement Act training? Which
no.
we don't offer formal training, but we'll happily ship Stef out to come and talk to you.
No, I mean, I'm always happy to speak to people. But as I've said, I can only offer from an East Riding perspective, really. If you're not going through the framework, obviously, if you are working through the framework, then I'm quite happy to give you all the support.
That's fine. We have just had one pop through, which certainly rings some bells for me. Depending on the authority, we can find it extremely difficult to gain feedback on our submission when not successful. From your slides, is this now a legal requirement?
So previously, you should have been receiving that feedback. If it's under the framework, it is different. We encourage the feedback, but it's down to the authority, really. But certainly for open tendering, this is exactly what has to be provided.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, we provide standard templates for feedback, don't we, through the framework? So we've got those standards, and reflecting on kind of my past experience as a project manager, it was always an area that I personally was quite comfortable giving feedback to tenderers, recognising the tenderers have put a lot of time and effort into putting together a package to put forward a bid. And for me, it feels morally the least that we should do is give them feedback so they can improve for the future. But I recognise that it is an area that some procurement professionals are very risk averse to, and they'll of course comply with the Act, but beyond that, they're very reluctant to give additional feedback.
I think previously as well, I don't think it was quite as well set out. So it was, yes, you should provide feedback and provide the relative advantages, but that was under PCR 15, whereas under the Act, it's very prescriptive, the information that has to be provided.
Yeah. Which I always find interesting, because it is sometimes it's the information that isn't necessarily prescribed, which is really the key piece. I mean, I reflect back on a tender that I handled several years ago, and fundamentally it was to be working on a live site, and we had a method statement which was had very clearly been written that we were going to close the site for a year whilst they did the work. So they scored very poorly in terms of their quality submission, and they objected, and we sat down and talked through it, and it was, well, fundamentally you've missed one of the key points here, which is this is going to remain open. So what you've put forward just isn't fit for purpose, unfortunately. Just another question come through. Presumably all the current YORhub frameworks are via PCI 2015, therefore call-offs will also be under 2015.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the first one under the new Act will be the Your Build Majors, which is currently out to tender.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll give people a couple more moments if anyone's got anything else to ask. Just on the downloading of slides. Yes, we'll be making that. As I say, we'll be making the recording of the conference available on the YouTube channel. We'll be making the slides available after the conference, certainly. But if there's not any other questions, I will thank you for your time, Stef, and any other comments before you escape?
No, just if anybody does have any questions, please feel free to contact us.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. So just coming to the end of day one then, and I will put my slides up for what it's worth. I mean, for me, I've massively enjoyed the session. I think there's some really good points that came out of the panel discussion this morning. Certainly key, and really sort of drives home the importance of giving suppliers and the educational establishments in the region sufficient notice of schemes. That pipeline is really critical, and we would really encourage clients on the call to come to us with projects. And as Mark said in his session, it doesn't mean that you're committed to using the framework, but just being able to give people the visibility of these schemes are coming through is really, really important. And equally, when it comes to your expressions of interest, we do see, or we have seen in the past, some expressions of interest with very, very little information, and it makes it a difficult decision for tenderers to decide whether to bid or not. And we will always facilitate conversations, pre-expression of interest conversations, kind of informal pre-market engagement, all those kind of things we can do with the framework suppliers, working with yourself. So there's a lot of options out there to try and make sure that you get as good tenders as you can for your schemes. So very finally, just to flag up the sessions for day two on Thursday. So day two is being hosted by Steve Baker, the YORhub's Joint Chair of Operations. So he'll be doing a brief welcome, and then he's doing the first session, which is artificial intelligence developments in construction. He's been doing some research in terms of examples of best practice. So he's going to be discussing some of the opportunities, but also challenges in terms of the use of AI. We've then got a session hosted by Phil Henderson, who is the program manager for YORbuild, and Stephen Bull at Sheffield City Council. Stephen's a insurance specialist, and he's going to be talking about how to set your insurance levels and reducing risk, which I think is a really important topic. It's something that time and again we'll get really, really sort of the same questions coming through in terms of what PI should I set on this job. Can I accept this? Can I accept that? And it's something that professionals really do need to get a good handle on in terms of understanding what they should be putting in their contracts. And then finally, you've got myself, sadly, and my colleague Chris Bourne from North Yorkshire Council. So what we did at the start of the year was we undertook quite a lengthy series of independent interviews with YORhub users and suppliers to kind of start off a process of encouraging feedback to come to us. And I would very much always say to anyone who wants to have a discussion, you know, about what's good, what could be better, do talk to us. But we found as a part of that there were a series of things that came out that were you know, for as an example, we would love to use YORbuild, but we can't because we don't do JCT. We do JCT. We recommend NEC. I'm an NEC accredited project manager, but if you want to use JCT, that can be facilitated through YORbuild. So we felt it was worth having a session to kind of talk through one. We've said debunking myths, but also kind of, I guess, showing you how to get the most out of your frameworks, touching on some of the areas that Mark covered in his presentation. So I hope that's of interest to everyone. Thank you for making it all the way through the conference, and hopefully I'll see everyone back on Thursday. But otherwise, thanks very much for your time, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.